Hey hey. Welcome back to The Fiction Wizard. We've got something fire today. Pomfrey found 53 suppression charms on Harry, sealed the wing and old the DMLE. Likes and subs keep us going. Alright, story time. Chapter 1, 53. The broom hit the mud at 7:30 in the morning, and Harry Potter followed it down a second later. It wasn't a dramatic fall. That was almost the worst part. He didn't get knocked off by a bludger or thrown in a spectacular arc that people might retell at dinner. He simply ran out of the ability to hold on, and his fingers uncurled, and the ground came up to meet him with a quiet, businesslike efficiency that suggested the earth had been waiting for this moment all morning. He lay there for a second, cheek against the cold grass, listening to the rain. Oliver Wood's boots appeared at the edge of his vision. Muddied. Steady. The boots of a man who had not fallen off his broom. Potter. I'm aware, Harry said, into the grass. You've been on that broom for 4 hours. Also aware. You dropped your seeker instinct somewhere around the 3rd hour. I watched you miss a practice snitch that was hovering. Hovering, Harry. It wasn't even moving. Harry pushed himself up onto his elbows. The Quidditch pitch swam a little at the edges of his vision. The rain was light and thin and relentless, the kind that didn't feel like much until you'd been in it for 4 hours and realized it had soaked through every layer you owned. His glasses were so fogged and wet that the world beyond 3 feet was a gray smear. I'll get it next time, he said. There won't be a next time today because I'm ending practice. Wood crouched down, which put his face level with Harry's, and he had the expression he always got when he was trying to be a captain instead of a person. Concerned but analytical. You don't look right. Cheers. I mean it. You look, Wood paused, searching for the word. Gray. Harry considered disputing this, decided he didn't have the energy, and accepted Wood's offered hand. The pull upright sent a spike of something unpleasant through his chest, not pain, exactly, more like resistance, like his body was objecting to vertical as a concept. He stood anyway. His hands were shaking slightly. He told himself it was the cold. It probably wasn't the cold. The other Gryffindors were filing off the pitch in a clump, talking amongst themselves in the low, relieved tones of people who had survived something. Fred and George were having a conversation that involved elaborate hand gestures. Alicia was wringing out her ponytail. Katie Bell glanced back at Harry with the particular look that girls gave you when they decided to worry about you but knew you wouldn't appreciate them saying so. He picked up his broom and walked off the pitch. By the time he reached the locker room, the shaking had moved from his hands to somewhere deeper. It wasn't violent. It wasn't anything he could point to, just this low, persistent vibration in his chest, like a string wound too tight, like something in him was pushing against a door. He'd felt it before. He'd been feeling it, if he was honest, for weeks. A tightness. A sense of pressure building without release. He'd told himself it was stress, OWL year, umbrage, the dreams, all of it stacking up. He'd told himself it was fine. He changed out of his Quidditch kit alone in the shower room, because everyone else had already gone, and he stood under the hot water longer than he should have and breathed carefully and waited for the vibration to settle. It didn't. By the time he crossed the castle grounds, the morning had moved on to something closer to 8 o'clock and the rain was beginning to mean it. He was thinking about breakfast and whether he'd make it before the plates cleared, which was why he didn't immediately notice how bad he felt until he was on the 3rd-floor corridor and had to stop walking and put his hand on the stone wall because the floor had developed an opinion about which direction it wanted to be. He stood very still. A suit of armor watched him from the alcove across the corridor with the blank, polite disinterest of something that has seen a great deal of student suffering over the centuries. I'm fine, Harry told it. He wasn't sure why. He made it to the hospital wing under his own power, which he would later consider a minor achievement worth noting. He pushed the door open and immediately Madame Pomfrey looked up from her desk with the expression she reserved for people who arrived before she'd had her morning tea, which was to say, not a welcoming expression. Mr. Potter. She set down her quill. Quidditch practice? Just dizzy, he said. Probably nothing. I've been on the broom since before 6, so, sit down. He sat on the nearest bed. The white sheets were crisp and smelled like the same cleaning potion they'd always smelled like, something between lavender and antiseptic, and there was something almost Pavlovian about it. Every time he smelled that smell he felt simultaneously safer and more worried. Pomfrey was already moving, pulling out her diagnostic kit with the brisk efficiency of someone for whom this was the 32nd iteration of the same scene. She tooted at his soaked state, conjured a warming charm that he felt settle over his shoulders like a dry blanket, and then raised her wand. Deep diagnostic, she said, partly to herself, partly to him. Full core assessment, since we're here. You've been looking peaky all term and I've been meaning to get you in. Harry, who had been planning to be out of here in 10 minutes, said nothing. The diagnostic spell was one of the more ancient ones in a healer's repertoire, not one golden light but a slow cascade of them, different colors bleeding into each other, reading different systems. Pomfrey had performed it on every student who came through her wing at the start of term, a baseline for everyone, a deeper check for those she was concerned about. Harry had been on the concerned about list since 1991. She began to read the results in the air before him, murmuring figures under her breath, ticking through bone density, magical fatigue markers, nutritional deficits from summers that nobody talked about directly but Pomfrey always noted. Harry watched her face. He'd learned, over 5 years, to read Madame Pomfrey's face. It was a reliable diagnostic tool in its own right. The pressed lips meant minor concern. The slight frown meant she was calculating a treatment plan. The raised single eyebrow meant something unexpected but manageable. He'd never seen what her face did now. She went very still. Not the stillness of someone stopping to think. The stillness of someone who has seen something they don't have immediate words for. Her wand hand lowered, slowly, and she stared at the readout floating in the air between them, and for a moment she forgot Harry was in the room. Madame Pomfrey, he said. She held up one finger. Wait. She cast the diagnostic again. Different variant, same cascade, slightly different coloring. She watched it resolve. She cast a third one, this one in a deep, unpleasant burgundy that Harry had never seen before, and she watched that one with an expression that had moved past surprise into something harder. What? Harry said. Lie back, please. What is it? I need you to lie back and stay very still, Mr. Potter. Can you do that for me? The tone of her voice was the one she used for students who were about to hear something they didn't want to hear. He knew that tone. He had been on the receiving end of it several times, and it never preceded good news. He lay back. She ran the burgundy diagnostic again, and this time she started counting under her breath. Harry stared at the ceiling. There was a crack in the stone up there, thin as a hair, running from the window toward the far wall. He'd stared at that crack before, from this same bed, at various points in his Hogwarts career. It was oddly comforting, the sameness of it. 49, 50, 51, Pomfrey's voice had gone quiet and controlled in the way that meant she was managing herself carefully. 52, 53. Silence. 53 what? Harry asked. She didn't answer immediately. He heard her set her wand down on the metal tray beside the bed with a small, precise click. He heard her exhale through her nose. Madame Pomfrey. 53 what? Suppression charms, she said. Harry turned his head to look at her. She was looking at the diagnostic readout, and her jaw was set, and in the 5 years he had known Poppy Pomfrey she had been brisk and fussy and occasionally sharp and sometimes unexpectedly kind, but he had never once seen her look like this. Like she was holding something very hot in her hands and deciding, with great care, what to do with it. Suppression charms, he repeated. Layered suppression charms. Cast in sequence, designed to compound on each other. She pulled up a stool and sat down, which was the gesture that meant she'd decided the conversation required it. 53 of them, Mr. Potter. Applied to your magical core. Harry sat up slowly. The vibration in his chest had changed character slightly. It was the same pressure, but now that it had a name, had a reason, it felt different. Less like illness. More like something straining. When, he said. They're dated. Suppression charms carry date signatures when you run the right diagnostic. She paused. The oldest ones were cast when you were 14 months old. The room was very quiet. Outside, the rain had picked up. Harry looked at his hands. Ordinary hands. Slightly too thin, the knuckle on his right index finger scraped from where he'd caught the broom grip wrong this morning. Who put them there, he said, and his voice came out very even, which surprised him. Pomfrey's expression shifted. I have suspicions, she said, carefully. But this is not something I can address alone, Harry. This requires, she stood, the decision clearly already made. I'm going to need you to stay here. Do you understand? I need you to stay in this bed and not move, not send any owls, not speak to anyone, until I've done what I need to do. What are you going to do? I'm going to seal the wing, she said, and I'm going to owl the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Harry stared at her. The Ministry, he said. The DMLE, she corrected. Specifically. This is a serious magical crime, Mr. Potter. What has been done to your core is not, she stopped. Started again. This is not something I am prepared to manage within the school's administrative structure. Not when I don't yet know who is responsible and who may not be. He understood what she wasn't saying. The school's administrative structure included Dumbledore. And Dumbledore, who knew everything that had ever happened in this castle, had never mentioned 53 suppression charms on Harry's magical core. All right, Harry said. She had clearly expected more resistance. Her expression shifted again, briefly. All right? You're the adult in the room, Harry said. You're doing the right thing. I'll stay. He paused. Can I ask, what exactly are the charms suppressing? What's underneath them? Pomfrey reached out and, in a gesture that he did not think was entirely professional and certainly was not part of the Hogwarts healer's standard training, she put her hand briefly on his forearm. Everything, she said quietly. They're suppressing everything, Mr. Potter. Your core is, she shook her head. We'll understand it better when they're properly assessed. For now, stay put. She walked to the doors of the hospital wing. He heard the ward lock engage, a deep sound that resonated in the stone of the walls, not just a locking charm but a full seal, the kind used for magical quarantine or extreme privacy. The windows went opaque. Then she went to her office, and he heard the scratch of a quill moving fast. Harry lay back down. He stared at the crack in the ceiling. 14 months old. He thought about the Dursleys' house. About the cupboard under the stairs, which was where he had lived until he was 11 and his Hogwarts letter had made it impossible to keep him there and call themselves normal. He thought about how magic had always done strange things around him, not more strange than around other young witches and wizards, but maybe the wrong kinds of strange. Not controlled enough. Too desperate. As if it was fighting to get out. The vibration in his chest was stronger now. Not painful, but present. Demanding. He pressed his hand flat against his sternum and felt it pulse once, like a second heartbeat. Okay, he said, quietly, to himself, or to whatever was waking up under his ribs. Okay. I hear you. The charm cracked. He felt it go, a small fracture in something deep, the sensation less like breaking glass and more like a knot finally loosening in a muscle you'd forgotten was clenched. It sent a warm shock through his whole body, fingertips to soles of his feet, and he gasped and sat upright and his glasses fell off his face and he grabbed them before they hit the mattress. He put them back on. He took them back off. He didn't need them. He sat there with his glasses in his hand, staring at the far wall of the hospital wing, at the grain of the stone and the individual dust motes drifting in the gray morning light coming through the high windows, and he could see everything. Crisp and clear and detailed in a way the world simply had not been 5 minutes ago. He put his glasses on again. The world blurred. He took them off. It sharpened. He said, to no one. From her office, he heard Pomfrey move to the window, heard the soft swoosh of an owl departing. Then a second. Then a third. More than one letter, then. He lay back against the pillow, glasses folded in his hand, and thought about 53. 53 charms. One had just cracked. Not because anyone had removed it, he didn't think anyone had yet, but because it had been identified, because it had been named, and apparently that was enough for his magic to start doing something about it on its own. Like his core, freed from ignorance if not yet from the charms themselves, had taken the opportunity to start pressing back. He thought about the way he'd always struggled in practical lessons, not badly, he wasn't bad at magic, but there was always something held back, a ceiling he couldn't push past, a frustrating sense that he was reaching for something just beyond the length of his arm. He thought about the fact that he was, on paper, a fairly talented wizard but not an extraordinary one. Not the way the stories and the prophecy and the weight everyone placed on him seemed to suggest he should be. He thought about Voldemort, who had tried to kill a 14-month-old child and failed, and had been destroyed by the attempt, and nobody had ever had a completely satisfying explanation for why. Maybe the explanation was simpler than anyone thought. Maybe the question wasn't how did a baby survive Voldemort, maybe the question was what kind of baby was Harry Potter before someone took most of what he was and buried it 53 layers deep. The door to Pomfrey's office opened and she came out. She looked at him in his bed. "You took your glasses off," she said. "One of them cracked," he told her. "On its own. I didn't do anything." She came close and looked at his eyes with a diagnostic charm, quick and practiced. Something in her expression shifted, the same kind of shift you saw when someone's private expectations were confirmed and they didn't know yet whether to be pleased or frightened. "Do they hurt?" she asked. "Your eyes?" "No," he said. "Actually, no. Nothing hurts. I feel better than I did an hour ago." He paused. "That seems like it should be the wrong direction." "Your magic is reasserting itself," she said. "As suppression charms degrade, the magic they were suppressing it doesn't wait patiently. It begins to reclaim what it lost." She looked at him very steadily. "This is going to continue, Harry. As the investigation proceeds, as the charms are formally identified and catalogued, more of them will crack. I don't want you to be frightened of it." "I'm not frightened of it," Harry said honestly. She studied him for a moment. "No," she said slowly, "I don't suppose you are." There was something odd in her voice, something between relief and grief. He decided not to ask about it yet. "You sent more than one owl," he said instead. 3. Amelia Bones at the DMLE, because she is the most trustworthy person in that building and the only one I'd trust with this. Arthur Weasley, because you will need an adult who is entirely uncompromised and already on your side. And, she paused. St. Mungo's. The Charms Suppression Ward. They have curse breakers who specialize in core restoration. Not Dumbledore, Harry said. No, said Pomfrey, and there was a whole conversation in that single syllable. Harry nodded slowly. He turned his glasses over in his hands. They were his first link to a world that had wanted him. Hagrid had bought him these glasses. He'd worn them for 5 years. He set them carefully on the bedside table. How long until someone gets here? He asked. Amelia Bones? If she takes my letter at face value, Pomfrey checked her watch. 2 hours. Perhaps 3. She's not a woman who dawdles when there's cause to move. Harry considered this. 2 or 3 hours was a long time to be in the hospital wing alone with 52 remaining suppression charms and his magic quietly dismantling them from the inside. He looked at the sealed doors. Can Hermione and Ron come? Pomfrey's expression did something complicated. The wing is sealed, she started. I know. But you could send for them. You could include them in the seal perimeter. He paused. I'm not going to fall apart, Madame Pomfrey. That's not, I'm fine. I'm better than fine. But if I'm going to be here for 3 hours waiting for the DMLE, I'd rather have my friends than not. She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that he thought she might say no. Then she went back to her office and he heard her speak to a house elf in a low voice, and 20 minutes later the doors to the hospital wing unsealed briefly, admitted 2 people, and sealed again. Hermione came in with a piece of toast in her hand and her hair still half-braided, which was how Harry knew she'd been pulled directly from breakfast. Ron was behind her, fully dressed and already scanning the room with the quick threat assessment look he'd developed over 5 years of their particular variety of friendship. What happened? Hermione said. She looked at him, really looked, the way she did when she was cataloging, and he watched her expression shift. You're not wearing your glasses. Don't need them anymore, Harry said. Ron's eyes went wide. What? Close the curtain, Harry said. Come sit down. I'll explain. He explained. Ron went through 4 distinct stages during the explanation, which Harry tracked with a kind of distant interest: initial confusion, growing comprehension, a deepening red around his ears that usually meant anger, and then a blank, very still expression that was worse than the anger because it meant Ron had gone past the point where he had words. Hermione asked 12 questions in the time it took Harry to cover the basic facts. She had not touched her toast. By the time he reached the part about the charm cracking on its own, she had her knees pulled up to her chest and her arms wrapped around them, which was her thinking posture. 14 months old, she said. That's what she said. Someone cast suppression charms on you at 14 months old, she repeated, as if the restatement might produce a different outcome. Yeah. Harry, said Ron, and his voice had come back but it was very controlled. Do you know who? I have a theory, Harry said. Same one Pomfrey has, I think, but we're not saying it until someone investigates. Ron's jaw worked. Harry could see him doing the arithmetic. Who would have had access to a 14-month-old Harry Potter, who would have had reason, who would have had the skill to layer 53 charms in a way that held for 14 years. There weren't many names that satisfied all 3 criteria. He had reasons, Harry said quietly. He always has reasons. And they're usually almost good enough. Hermione made a sound that was not quite a word. I'm not angry, Harry said, testing whether that was true. It was, which surprised him, or maybe it didn't, because the thing building in his chest wasn't anger, it was something cleaner and more forward-facing than that. I think I'll be angry later. But right now, he held up his hand. The slight shimmer he'd noticed around his fingers when he woke up this morning was still there. The light in the hospital wing, gray and rainy, seemed to collect around him differently than it did around them. Right now I'm more interested in what happens when the rest of them crack. You said there are 52 left, Hermione said. She had unfolded herself and was reaching into the bag she carried everywhere. She pulled out parchment and a quick-quotes quill, which she had confiscated from Rita Skeeter 2 years ago and repurposed for actual note-taking. We should catalog this properly. Dates, sensations, anything you notice when one breaks. You're going to make a research project out of my suppression charms, Harry said. Yes, said Hermione, without apology. Good, said Harry. Ron finally exhaled. He had been holding his breath for a while. What do we do until Bones gets here? Wait, Harry said. Pay attention. And Ron, he met his friend's eyes, because this was important. When she gets here. When the investigation starts. Don't try to make it easier for me. Don't manage it. Just, be there. Ron held his gaze. Something passed between them, the wordless understanding of people who had been through enough together. "All right," Ron said. "Yeah. All right." The second charm cracked at 9:15. Harry felt it go in the middle of describing the feeling of the first one, which Hermione found scientifically useful and Harry found mildly annoying. This one was different, deeper, older, and its release sent a wave of something through the room that made the candles in the wall sconces flare briefly to twice their size and then settle. Ron swore. Hermione's quill was writing very fast. Harry sat with the sensation for a moment. It was like breathing in after you'd had something pressing on your chest for a very long time. Like a window opening in a room that had always been a degree too stuffy. He pressed his hand to his sternum again and felt the space where two chains had loosened. What was that one? He asked himself, not expecting an answer. He got one, though, because Pomfrey had come back in at the sound of the candle flare and run her burgundy diagnostic again, and she read the result quietly. "Awareness suppression," she said. The one that just released was primarily an awareness suppression. Specifically, perceptive enhancement. Magical sensitivity. The ability to feel and read ambient magic in your environment. Harry looked around the hospital wing with its walls of old, spell-dense stone. He felt it like texture, like the difference between smooth and rough. He could feel the ward seals Pomfrey had placed on the doors, dense and layered and old. He could feel the faint, deep thrumming of the castle's foundational wards running through the floor. He could feel. He turned his head toward the window. "There's someone on the grounds," he said. "Moving fast. Coming from the gate." 3 seconds later, they heard the distant sound of the main gate opening. Ron and Hermione stared at him. "Awareness suppression," Harry said, and he smiled for the first time all morning. It wasn't the careful, hedged smile he'd been producing for 5 years. It was the smile of someone who has just been handed back something they never knew they'd lost. "Right." Pomfrey looked at the window. Looked at Harry. Made the face she'd been making all morning, relief and grief mixed together. "That," she said, "will be Amelia Bones." She went to the window and said a quiet word that cleared a section of the opacity, and Harry looked out at the castle grounds, at the rain-dark lawns and the grey sky, and he saw the figure striding up the path from the gate. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s, dark-robed, moving through the rain with the air of someone who considered weather a personal inconvenience rather than an obstacle. There were 2 people behind her, keeping pace, both wearing DMLE identification in the visible way of people who wanted to be clearly identified from a distance. The woman in front had close-cropped iron-gray hair and the walk of someone who had spent 30 years making rooms pay attention when she entered. Harry had seen Amelia Bones once before, at the Quidditch World Cup, at a distance. He'd registered her then as formidable. Up close, even through glass, even across 100 yards, she was something more specific than that. She was, Harry thought, someone who was about to make this into a very serious problem for whoever had cast those charms. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that the prospect did not worry him at all. "Put the quill away for a minute," he told Hermione. "But, the note-taking phase is over," Harry said. "The actual part is starting." He swung his legs off the bed, stood up, and reached for the basin of water on the bedside table to splash some on his face. He caught his reflection in the surface of the water before it stilled. He looked the same. Same face, same hair, same scar. But his eyes without the glasses, his eyes with 2 suppression charms released from the core behind them, his eyes were startlingly, uncomplicatedly clear. Like someone had taken a photograph of him and turned up a setting he hadn't known was turned down. He straightened his robes. Outside, he heard Pomfrey moving to the door, heard the ward seals adjust to allow authorized entry, heard the sound of professional footsteps on stone. Ron came to stand beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Hermione on his other side. "You know what's strange?" Harry said, quietly enough that only they could hear. Everything, right now, Ron said. I feel fine, Harry said. I mean, I feel good. I've been walking around under 53 suppression charms my entire life and I thought that was just, he stopped. I thought that was just what being me felt like. I thought this tightness, this ceiling, that was just my personality, or my power level, or something about being a half-blood or, he shook his head. It's not, though. It was never that. He looked at his hand again. The shimmer was more pronounced now. I don't actually know what I am yet. We're about to find out. The door opened. Amelia Bones walked into the hospital wing, took one look at Harry Potter standing at the foot of the bed, no glasses, silver-lit fingertips, 17-year-old face wearing an expression of absolute untroubled calm, and she stopped walking. She looked at him for 2 full seconds. Then she looked at Pomfrey. Your letter, she said 53. 51 as of 10 minutes ago, Pomfrey said. 2 have released already. On their own. His core is reasserting itself. Bones looked back at Harry. Mr. Potter, she said. Madam Bones, he said. I have questions. I have answers, Harry said. And I imagine we both have some of the same ones. Something moved in Amelia Bones' face, a recognition, maybe, or a recalibration. The assessment of a woman who had expected to find a confused, frightened 15-year-old boy and had found something else entirely. Yes, she said slowly. I expect we do. The rain beat against the sealed windows of the hospital wing, and the castle settled around them with the deep patience of very old stone, and somewhere in Harry's chest, a third suppression charm developed a hairline crack. He felt it, and he did not flinch. Chapter 2, Archaeology. Amelia Bones did not sit down. Harry noticed this immediately, the way she positioned herself near the window, back to the wall, a clear line of sight to both the door and the bed. Not aggressive. Tactical. The unconscious geometry of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong position could mean the wrong outcome. Her 2 DMLE officers flanked the door without being asked. Both were young, both were sharp-eyed, and both were making the particular effort of looking at everything except Harry Potter's glowing hands. Healer Pomfrey, Bones said. She had a voice like a letter opener, precise, no drag. Walk me through the diagnostic findings. Everything, in order. I want to hear it from you before I look at any parchment. Pomfrey did. She was clinical about it, which Harry suspected was its own kind of courage, keeping her voice level while describing something that was, stripped of medical terminology, a systematic dismantling of a child. She used words like stratified suppression architecture and core compression and developmental arrest, and behind every phrase was the same brutal arithmetic. Someone had spent considerable time and skill making certain Harry Potter would be less than he was. Bones listened without interrupting. Her 2 officers had produced parchment and were writing. Ron, who had positioned himself on the bed behind Harry with his arms crossed, was watching Bones with the specific look he usually reserved for chess opponents he hadn't fully solved yet. Hermione had not put the quill away. The first charm, Bones said, when Pomfrey finished. The oldest one. Cast at 14 months. She paused deliberately. You said it was professional work. What does that mean? It means it wasn't improvised, Pomfrey said. Suppression charms at that level of complexity require planning. They require understanding the specific core you're suppressing, its nature, its depth, its growth trajectory. You can't apply them blindly. You have to know the core first. She met Bones' eyes. Someone assessed Harry Potter's magical core thoroughly before casting the first charm. Someone knew exactly what they were working with. Bones was quiet for a moment. And what were they working with? Everyone in the room looked at Harry. Harry shrugged. We're still finding out, he said. 2 charms have cracked so far and I've gotten my eyesight back and I can feel the wards in this building like they're painted on my skin. I figure we'll have a better answer once more of them go. Bones studied him. You're remarkably composed for someone who just discovered they've been magically altered since infancy. I've had dementors, a basilisk, a graveyard, Harry said. Comparatively, this is the first thing that's happened to me that's actually moving in a good direction. Something shifted in Bones' expression, not softened, exactly, but adjusted. She pulled up the high stool from beside the wall and settled onto it, which apparently constituted sitting down for Amelia Bones. Mr. Potter. Before we go further, I need to establish one thing absolutely clearly. She clasped her hands together. This investigation is mine. Not the minister's. Not the Wiesengemot's. Mine, under the authority of the DMLE, operating as an independent body under the charter provisions that predate the current ministry leadership by 400 years. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You're telling me Fudge can't pull you off it, Harry said. I'm telling you Merlin himself could not pull me off it, Bones said, flatly. Not once I've opened a file. She looked at him steadily. Now. Are you prepared to give a formal statement? Yes. Do you want representation present? A solicitor, or a Wiesengemot advocate? Can Arthur Weasley serve? Ron's head came up sharply. He's not legally qualified as an advocate, Bones said. Can he be here? A pause. Bones glanced at Ron, made what appeared to be an instant and correct assessment of the situation, and nodded. He can be present as a supporting adult. The moment he begins legally advising, he'll need credentials or I'll have to ask him to step out. She paused. Though I suspect Arthur Weasley's instinct for keeping his mouth appropriately shut when needed is rather well developed by this point. He'll be here in about an hour, Pomfrey said. His reply came 20 minutes ago. Good. Then we'll begin the preliminary while we wait. Bones produced a small crystal phial from her robes and set it on the bedside table. Veritaserum protocol is optional at this stage. I won't compel it. Fine either way, Harry said. Bones looked at him again. There was something in that look, not suspicion, more like she was recalibrating continuously, rebuilding her model of who this boy was every 30 seconds. Let's start at the beginning, she said. Tell me the first time you noticed something was wrong. Harry thought about it. Every time, he said, honestly. I always felt like there was more. Like I was reaching for something that should have been there. I assumed it was normal. Describe it physically. Pressure. In the chest, mostly. Like, he pressed his fist against his sternum briefly. Like something pushing from inside. Getting stronger over the past few months, actually. I think as I've gotten older and the core has grown, the charms have been working harder to hold it. That's consistent, Pomfrey said. The diagnostic showed significant strain markers. Several of the charms were beginning to show degradation on their own. They were never designed to hold indefinitely, no suppression charm can hold a core forever as it matures. So they were going to break eventually, Hermione said, with the tone of someone filing information into a system. Even without the diagnostic identifying them. Yes, Pomfrey said. Given the rate of degradation, I'd estimate, she paused. Within 6 months. Perhaps less. The magical feedback could have been quite serious. The room absorbed that. Quite serious, Ron said, in the specific tone he used when a phrase was doing too much work. What does quite serious mean? It means we're fortunate the diagnostic happened now, Pomfrey said, which was not exactly an answer but was clear enough. Harry filed the detail away. 6 months. The charms would have broken on their own by Christmas, maybe, and whatever came out the other side of that, uncontrolled, unsupported, his magic ripping through 53 layers of compacted suppression, would not have been the orderly, rolling release that was happening now. He thought about what that might have looked like. He decided not to think about it too long. Mr. Potter, Bones said, pulling his attention back. I need to ask you directly. Do you have any suspicion about who cast these charms? Do you want me to say the name? I want you to say what you know and what you suspect, separately and clearly. What I know, Harry said, is that the charms are 53 in number, cast in a structured sequence, beginning when I was 14 months old and added to over a period of years. The work is skilled enough to require a master-level understanding of core magic. The person who did it would have needed sustained access to me. I didn't live in the wizarding world until I was 11. So the person either had access to where I was living or they cast some of the later charms after I came to Hogwarts. He paused. What I suspect, he looked at Bones evenly. I suspect someone decided that the safest version of Harry Potter was the most limited one. And I suspect that person was doing it because they loved me, in their way, and were wrong about what that required. The room was quiet. Hermione's quill had stopped. That's a very considered answer, Bones said. I've had the last 2 hours to think, Harry said. And are you angry? I'm going to be, Harry said. Later. Right now he looked down at his right hand, where the shimmer had settled into something more consistent, a faint luminescence that was visible even in the gray daylight coming through the sealed windows. Right now I'm paying attention. Because whatever is underneath these charms is still coming up, and I want to understand it before I start deciding how to feel about why it was put down. Bones set her clasped hands on her knee and regarded him for a long moment. Then she turned to her 2 officers. Kendrick. Take the diagnostic findings to the file and start cross-referencing with core suppression case law. I want precedent going back 200 years. The younger of the 2 officers, a woman with a tight braid and quick eyes, nodded and moved to the corner with the parchment. Marsh. I need you to go to the Ollery. No, not this school's, go to the village and find a neutral dispatch service. Send a message to the Unspeakables. Tell them I need a consult on a case involving possible illegally modified magical core artifacts, and I need it within 24 hours. The other officer left. The Unspeakables, Ron said. The Department of Mysteries has experts on magical core theory that no one else in the country can match, Bones said matter-of-factly. I like to use the best tools available. She looked at Pomfrey. Can you secure the diagnostic records? Both the physical parchment and the spell data? Already done, Pomfrey said, pulling a locked case from behind her desk. Triple warded. I've kept a duplicate in a separate location. Bones gave her an approving look. Good woman. Harry watched Pomfrey's reaction to this, a small, precise lift of the chin. Not pride, exactly. The look of someone who has spent years doing the right thing quietly and is not accustomed to being told so. The 3rd charm cracked at 9:30, and the 4th followed at 45 seconds later. These 2 came together, and the release was different from the previous 2, less the feeling of a knot loosening and more the feeling of walls coming down. His skin prickled from scalp to feet. The temperature in the room seemed to shift, a degree warmer, the candles in the sconces flaring again and this time staying slightly brighter than before. 2, Hermione said immediately, her quill flying. What did you feel? Language, Harry said. No, not language. More like, hearing. No. He pressed his fingers to his temple, trying to find the word for something he'd apparently never had language for before. I could always understand what Parseltongue actually was. Now I can feel where it comes from. It's not a curse. It's not a gift. He shook his head. It's just part of the landscape. Like knowing which direction north is. The room had gone very still. Parseltongue, Bones said, and there was nothing alarmed in her voice, only precision. That ability was present before the charms released? Yes. Since 2nd year, at least. Probably before, I just didn't know what it was. Harry paused. But now I can feel it differently. Like I always had to, reach for it. Now it's just there. Bones made a note. What else? The castle, Harry said. He turned his head slightly, feeling the layers of it, not just the wards from before, but deeper, older structures, the intent woven into the original stone. Hogwarts it's alive. I mean, everyone says that, but I can actually. He looked at the floor, at the old stone under his feet. There are wards under this building that haven't been touched in 600 years. They're responsive. They know I'm here. Harry, Hermione said quietly, and he looked at her, and her expression was complex and private. The sorting hat, she said. When it sorted you. Do you remember what it said? Out loud? Gryffindor. To you, she said. What it said to you. Inside. He remembered. The small, ancient, slightly musty voice inside his own head. Not Slytherin, eh? Are you sure? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. I can see it. It could see something, Harry said slowly. Even then. Even with the charms on. It could see through them to what was underneath. Enchanted objects often can, Pomfrey said, and her voice was quiet. The hat doesn't respond to the surface. It responds to the core. Bones had been listening to all of this with an expression of controlled fascination. So by the hat's assessment, she said, even at 11, through 53 layers of suppression, you had the qualities it associates with, all 4 houses, Harry said. That's what it felt like. It kept trying different ones. He paused. I chose Gryffindor. Actually chose it. Made it ask. Ron, behind him, made a small sound. Not surprise. Recognition. I want to establish something for the record, Bones said, sitting forward slightly on the stool. When you say the castle wards respond to you, what does that mean, specifically? What are they doing? Harry was quiet for a moment, feeling it out, the way you might probe the extent of something with careful fingers. They're acknowledging, he said at last. That's the best word. It's not active, not doing anything, just, I'm familiar to them. Which is strange because I wasn't born here and I've only been here 5 years. He frowned. Unless the suppression charms were also preventing the wards from registering you properly, Hermione said, and she said it fast, with the velocity of someone for whom the idea had arrived fully formed. Hogwarts' foundational wards are designed to assess and know every magical person within them. What if the charms were blocking that? What if the castle has been trying to recognize you for 5 years and couldn't quite, and now it can? Harry finished. They looked at each other. Write that down, Harry said. I already did, Hermione said. Arthur Weasley arrived at 10:23 in the morning, which meant he'd operate the moment Pomfrey's owl reached him and then still had to manage the long walk up from the gate. He came in slightly breathless, his robes hastily done up and his hair imperfectly combed, and he had the expression he got when he was genuinely frightened and managing it by moving fast. His eyes went straight to Harry. Harry stood up. All right? Arthur said, which was not really a question. Yeah, Harry said. I'm all right. Arthur crossed the room and put a hand on his shoulder and looked at him, the way only people who genuinely loved you looked at you, not for what was wrong, but to check that the essential person was still present and intact. He found what he was looking for. Harry watched him find it. Good, Arthur said. He squeezed his shoulder briefly and then straightened, turned to the room, and became the adult. Amelia. He nodded. Arthur. Bones nodded back, and there was mutual respect in both directions, the shorthand of 2 people who had been through enough of the same trenches to know each other's worth. Thank you for coming. Try to stop me. He looked at Ron, who gave him a look back that communicated a great deal, and then at Hermione, who had the particular expression she wore when she was 3 chapters ahead of everyone else and being patient about it. I'm going to ask you to sit, Bones told him. We're about to go over everything formally before I begin the active investigation phase. Harry, do you consent to Mr. Weasley being present for your full statement? Yes, Harry said. The next hour was procedural. Bones was thorough and methodical in the way of someone who had been burned before by cases that fell apart on technicalities. She took Harry's statement in sections, his early memories, his magic at the Dursleys, the pattern of magical incidents that had characterized his childhood, the progressive sense of constraint that he'd normalized so thoroughly he hadn't recognized it as external until this morning. Harry answered everything directly. He didn't soften it or manage it. When Bones asked about the cupboard under the stairs, he described it factually, and he watched Arthur's expression in his peripheral vision go through something controlled and painful, and he kept talking because the truth didn't need his permission to be the truth. Ron's jaw had been tight for 20 minutes when Harry reached the part about being told his parents had died in a car crash. They told you that, Bones said, her pen moving. From what age? As far back as I can remember, Harry said. I was 3 or 4 when I started asking. They always said, car crash. Drunk driver. Not, they were magical, not, he paused. I think I always knew it wasn't right. Even then. I just didn't have a framework for the alternative. The Dursleys were aware of the suppression charms? Bones asked. I don't know. They knew I was magical, and they hated it. Whether someone told them to contain me or whether they developed that independently, Harry stopped. Actually. Dudley. He sat forward slightly. My cousin. There were moments when he looked at me like I frightened him. Not ordinary frightened. Like he could see something. Kids sometimes can, can't they? Before they're trained not to. Pomfrey had been quiet for most of the hour. She spoke now. Some Muggle children with magical relatives retain a kind of ambient sensitivity. It's not measurable, but it's documented. If your core was putting out enough, she looked at Harry's faintly luminescent hands. If it was putting out enough even suppressed, a sensitive Muggle child might have perceived it as something threatening. Harry thought about Dudley. The way he'd always treated Harry less like a victim and more like something unpredictable. Less like bullying and more like preemptive defense. He was scared, Harry said, and the realization was strange and small and very nearly sympathetic. He was actually scared of me. As he possibly should have been, Bones said, and there was something dry and precise in her voice. Given what we're finding. It was Hermione who asked the question that had been in the room since the beginning. She asked it the way she asked most important things, directly, without ceremony, setting down her quill first to signal that this one was personal. Have you old Professor Dumbledore yet? She said. The question was addressed to Bones, but everyone in the room knew it was addressed to everyone. Bones set her pen down. Not yet. Are you going to? He is the headmaster of this school, Bones said. And I am currently operating within this school's grounds. Protocol requires I notify him. Protocol, said Arthur, quietly. Which I intend to follow, Bones said, at the appropriate time. Which is, she picked up her pen again. After I've finished establishing the factual record. After I've ensured the evidence is secured beyond any individual's ability to affect. And after I've spoken directly with Mr. Potter at whatever length is required. A silence stretched. You think he'll try to manage it, Harry said. I think, Bones said carefully, that Albus Dumbledore is the greatest wizard currently living. I think he has dedicated his life to causes he considers righteous. And I think that a man of his ability who holds those views and has held them for a very long time may have developed, she paused. A certain confidence in his own judgment about what information is necessary for other people to have. That is neither an accusation nor a character assassination. It is a professional assessment that affects how I sequence this investigation. Harry nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. That's exactly right. The 5th charm went at 10 minutes to noon. Then the 6th, and the 7th, and the 8th, in a rolling cascade that lasted 3 minutes and left Harry standing in the middle of the hospital wing with his eyes closed and both hands held slightly out at his sides, breathing deliberately, while around him every unanchored object on the nearest beds rose 2 inches off the surface and then, gently, settled back. Bones had stood up from her stool. The DMLE officer Kendrick had moved away from the wall. Arthur had his wand out, not pointed at anything, just present. Harry opened his eyes. The shimmer on his hands was not a shimmer anymore. It was a consistent, steady silver-gold luminescence that extended to his wrists. It didn't feel external. It didn't feel like it was coming from outside. It felt like looking at something that had always been there and only now the lamp was bright enough to see it. "For more," he said. "What were those?" Pomfrey ran the diagnostic. She read the results to herself first, and her expression did the thing it had been doing all morning. Fine motor magical control. Lateral spellcasting ability, the capacity to perform multiple spell forms simultaneously. Innate shielding reflex. She paused. And something I don't have specific terminology for. The diagnostic is describing it as environmental awareness beyond the standard 5 senses. Magical environmental mapping. That's not a standard category, Hermione said, her quill very still. No, Pomfrey said. It's not. Harry pressed his awareness outward, the way you'd push a sound out to fill a room. He felt the hospital wing, every person in it, Bones and Kendrick and Ron and Hermione and Arthur and Pomfrey, each one a distinct presence, distinct magical signatures, like different temperatures against his skin. He felt the corridor outside the sealed doors, empty right now. He felt the floor below, classrooms, a few students moving between them, Professor Flitwick's unmistakable fluttery magical signature near the east staircase. He felt, on the floor above, someone stop walking outside the hospital wing doors. Not in the corridor from the direction of the classrooms. From the direction of the headmaster's office. "He's here," Harry said. He looked at Bones. "Dumbledore. He's outside the door." Bones did not look surprised. "The wards told him the wing was sealed," she said. "He'd know something significant was happening." She straightened her robes. Looked at Harry. "Are you ready for this?" "I'm not afraid of him," Harry said, and it was as simple as that. Bones considered him one final moment with that recalibrating expression. Then she walked to the sealed door and lifted the ward enough to open it. The door swung open. Dumbledore stood in the doorway. Blue robes, silver hair, half-moon spectacles, the full weight of 70 years of accumulated authority. His eyes were very bright and they went directly to Harry. Harry looked back at him. Between them was everything that had always been between them, affection and trust and all the ways it had been quietly, carefully shaped. But Harry could feel it differently now. Could feel the specific texture of the dynamic, the way Dumbledore's gaze always moved from Harry's face to something further away, something he was calculating. Always calculating. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm and tired and old. "Professor," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at the DMLE officers, at Amelia Bones, at the locked diagnostic case on Pomfrey's desk. He looked at Harry's hands. His expression was calm in the specific way of people for whom calm is a practiced skill, not a natural state. "Amelia," he said. "I would have appreciated being contacted directly." "I'm sure you would have," Bones said pleasantly. "I'll contact you through official channels at the appropriate time. For now, Mr. Potter is giving a formal statement and I'd like to ask you to wait." "I am the headmaster, you are," Bones agreed. "And if any of the evidence I've gathered today suggests your involvement in this matter, that status will not protect you from the investigation that follows. I'm telling you this as a courtesy and as a friend, Albus." Her voice did not change temperature at all. "Please wait." The silence was long enough that Harry could hear the rain against the windows. Dumbledore looked at Harry again, and in his eyes was something that Harry, with his new, unburied clarity, could read with uncomfortable precision. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was the expression of a man who had made a decision and lived with it for 14 years and was now discovering that living with it was not the same as its being right. Harry held his gaze. He felt nothing except the castle around him, breathing slow and old, and the 51 remaining charms like shadows getting smaller, one by one. He felt one more crack as he stood there. 49, he thought. And waited for whatever came next. Chapter 3, The Architect. Dumbledore did not wait in the corridor. Bones hadn't actually expected him to. She'd given the instruction as a professional formality, the kind you issue so that non-compliance becomes part of the record. When Dumbledore stepped into the hospital wing and let the door close behind him, she made a small, precise note on her parchment and said nothing about it. Harry watched him come in and felt the room change. Not in a threatening way. More the way a room changed when someone very large sat down in it, a redistribution of weight. Dumbledore carried 70 years of accumulated consequence everywhere he went, and everyone in the hospital wing felt it differently. Kendrick had straightened slightly. Arthur had gone carefully neutral. Ron was doing the thing where he went very still to hide the fact that he wanted to move. Hermione had set down her quill, which was the most alarming response in the room. Dumbledore's eyes moved across all of them and then came back to Harry with the gravity of something falling. "May I sit?" he asked. "It's your school," Harry said. Dumbledore registered the answer, the precision of it, the thing it didn't say, and sat down on the chair beside the bed. He folded his hands in his lap, and for a moment he simply looked at Harry, and Harry looked back, and the thing between them was the kind of quiet that only existed between people who had a great deal to say and were both deciding where to start. Bones stayed near the window. She had her pen in her hand but she wasn't writing. "Watching." "Your hands," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "How many have released?" 10. "Since this morning." Harry paused. "They're going on their own. Once Pomfrey identified them, my magic started doing it without any help." He tilted his head slightly. "You know what they are?" "Obviously." "Yes," Dumbledore said. The word landed in the room like a stone into water, and the ripples went everywhere. Arthur's carefully neutral expression developed a fault line. Ron made a sound low in his throat. Hermione picked up her quill and put it down again immediately, as if she'd grabbed it by reflex and then decided it wasn't the moment. Bones said, calmly, "Albus. I need to caution you. Anything you say in this room is part of the formal record of this investigation." "I understand," Dumbledore said. "Do you want representation?" He looked at her gently. "I don't think that will be necessary." "That," Bones said, "is precisely the answer that concerns me." Dumbledore almost smiled. Then he looked back at Harry and the almost smile went somewhere else. "You're going to ask me why," Dumbledore said. "I'm going to ask you several things," Harry said. "Starting with when." "The first charm was cast on the night I left you with the Dursleys," Dumbledore said, in the tone of a man who has prepared himself to speak plainly. "November the 1st, 1981. You were 15 months old." "The diagnostic said 14 months, Pomfrey said. "You were 15 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days old," Dumbledore said. "If the diagnostic is reading 14 months, it's rounding to the nearest month of magical development rather than chronological age. Your core at that point was equivalent to that of an average 14-month-old child, despite your chronological age. Because of the events of October 31st. He paused. "Surviving the killing curse at such close range, it affected your development. Temporarily. You were diminished for a short period. The magical trauma was significant." Harry had not known this. He let it settle without letting it move him. "And you used that window," he said. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. I used that window to cast the first charm. Yes. On a baby, Harry said. On a 15-month-old child who had just survived being murdered, and you used the fact that his magic was temporarily weakened to pin it down before it could recover properly. The room was very quiet. Dumbledore did not look away. Yes, he said, for the third time, and the word was doing a different kind of work now. It wasn't confession. It was something more complicated, a man delivering an account he had rehearsed in private for years, knowing it would eventually be required, and finding that rehearsal and reality were not the same thing at all. Why? Harry said. And here it was, the question Harry had told Bones he would ask, the one he'd turned over in the 2 hours since this morning, the one that mattered more than any of the others because the answer was the load-bearing wall of the whole structure. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Not hesitant. Organizing. What do you know about the Peveril line? He asked. Several people in the room moved. Bones sat up straighter. Arthur's eyes sharpened. The Deathly Hallows story, Harry said. The three brothers. Wand, stone, cloak. The story as it is told, Dumbledore said. Yes. The wand is real, I have held it. The cloak is real, you own it. The stone is real, I have reason to believe it exists. But the story omits something. He looked at Harry with an expression that was entirely without deflection. The line itself. The Peveril bloodline carries something. A quality. It expresses differently in each generation, sometimes as preternatural skill, sometimes as an affinity for death magic, sometimes as something harder to categorize. In your case, he gestured at Harry's hands. In your case, it has expressed as something I have not seen in living memory. Something I have read about only in texts most wizards believe to be allegorical. What is it? Harry asked. I don't know precisely what to call it, Dumbledore said, and this appeared to genuinely cost him something, because Albus Dumbledore admitting the limits of his knowledge was not a common event. What I knew, in 1981, was that the child who had just survived Voldemort was carrying a magical core of a scope and character I had never encountered in a living person. And I knew, he stopped. I knew that Voldemort was not gone. Not truly. I knew he would return. And I knew that a 15-month-old child with that level of power, growing up unprotected in the world, visible to every magical person who passed within range of him, broadcasting like a beacon, his voice remained even, which was almost worse than if it hadn't. I made a decision. You decided to hide it, Harry said. I decided to protect it, Dumbledore said. There is a difference. Is there? The question hit its mark. Harry watched it land. What you suppressed, Harry said, wasn't the threat. You didn't hide what I was so that Voldemort couldn't find me, the blood wards at the Dursleys did that. You suppressed what I am so that I wouldn't, he stopped, working through it. So that I wouldn't grow into it too fast. So that I'd be manageable. So that when Voldemort came back, there would be a person you understood, in a situation you designed, responding in ways you could predict. He looked at Dumbledore. You didn't protect me. You controlled the variable. The silence this time was long. Ron had stood up from the bed. He was standing very still behind Harry, and his face was the color of old chalk. Dumbledore said, I also loved you. I know, Harry said. That's the part that makes it complicated. Dumbledore looked at him, really looked, the way he rarely did, without the performance of wisdom or the architecture of strategy, just an old man looking at a boy he had shaped and finding the shape had not held. You are not what I expected, he said quietly. What did you expect? Someone who would need more time to process this. You put 53 suppression charms on me, Harry said. I've had 10 of them crack in one morning and I feel better than I have in my entire life. What exactly was I supposed to need time to process? The anger, Dumbledore said. I told you, Harry said. I'll be angry later. Right now I'm paying attention. He leaned forward slightly. Now, the charms after the first. They weren't all cast in 1981. Some of them are more recent. Walk me through the others. Dumbledore looked at Pomfrey. Healer Pomfrey retains clinical privilege over the diagnostic data, Bones said smoothly, but she has shared relevant findings with my investigation. You may proceed on the assumption that I have a full record. Dumbledore accepted this with the particular grace of someone who has been professionally outmaneuvered and respects the quality of the maneuver. Additional charms were applied at the start of each Hogwarts year, he said. Beginning with your first year. As your core grew and the original charms strained against it, new layers were required to maintain the. How did you apply them? Harry asked. At the start of each year. I don't remember coming to your office before term began. They were applied at a distance, Dumbledore said. The quality of the room's silence changed again. At a distance, Bones said. Through the ambient wards of the school, Dumbledore said. The headmaster has access to the foundational wards. They interact with every magical person within the castle. A targeted suppression applied through those wards to a specific magical signature. He stopped at the expression on Bones' face. It is not simple. It is not something most wizards could do. But it is possible. It is also, Bones said, in the even tone she used when she was very angry, an unauthorized application of a targeted charm to a minor using institutional infrastructure. Which is significantly worse, legally, than a direct contact casting. She made a note. A deliberate, visible note. Go on. Dumbledore went on. He laid it out with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. Year by year, the escalating need as Harry's core grew. The decision to add lateral suppression for specific abilities that he deemed too dangerous to manifest, Parseltongue's full range, environmental awareness, the innate shielding reflex that would have made Harry effectively immune to casual surveillance spells. He described each decision as though it had been reasonable, because each individual decision, in isolation, had felt reasonable to him, and he had been alone with these decisions for 14 years, which was the kind of solitude that turned reasonable into inevitable. Harry listened to all of it. At some point, Arthur got up and went to stand by the window, and Harry could see him from the corner of his eye, looking out at the rain, his hands clasped behind his back, and Arthur was a man who liked the world to be essentially good and was regularly confronted with evidence that it was essentially complicated, and his back said everything his face was carefully not saying. Ron hadn't sat back down. There's one thing you haven't said, Harry said, when Dumbledore finished. There are likely several, Dumbledore said. The prophecy. Harry watched his face. The full prophecy. Not the piece Trelawney told you. The whole thing. Because whatever is coming out of these charms, whatever my core actually is, it changes the meaning of it, doesn't it? The line about power the Dark Lord knows not, yes, Dumbledore said. That's not love, Harry said. Or it's not only love. You always framed it as love. As sacrifice and protection. And those things are true, they're part of it, but they're not the whole thing. He held up his hand, silver gold light steady as a candle. This is part of it. Whatever this is. Dumbledore's expression was, for the first time all morning, genuinely unguarded. And what was in it was something that took Harry a moment to identify, because he was not accustomed to seeing it on Dumbledore's face. It was relief. Yes, Dumbledore said. That's correct. You knew what the power was, Harry said. And you suppressed it anyway. I knew what it might be, Dumbledore said. The prophecy says power the Dark Lord knows not. If that power was, he paused carefully. If it was the kind of power I suspected, then yes. It would be unknown to Voldemort. But it would also be unknown to us. To everyone. And power that no one understands, in a child who is a target, in a world at war, is better understood than buried, Harry said. I was afraid, Dumbledore said. The words were so unexpected, so entirely against the grammar of Albus Dumbledore, that they produced a silence unlike any of the others. Hermione had her hand over her mouth. Arthur had turned from the window. Not for myself, Dumbledore said. I want that to be understood. I have not been afraid for myself in a very long time. I was afraid of what would happen to you. And I was afraid, he stopped. Restarted. I was afraid of what you might become, Harry. Not as a threat. As the weight of it. To be 15 months old and carry what you carry. To grow up knowing it. I thought I was giving you a childhood. You gave me a cupboard, Harry said. The room did not move. Dumbledore absorbed this without looking away. The relief that had been in his face had gone somewhere deeper and left behind something that was mostly old. Yes, he said, very quietly. In trying to give you a childhood, I chose people who gave you a cupboard. That is, his voice remained even through apparent effort. That is perhaps the worst of it. Not the charms. The charms were a mistake in judgment. What the Dursleys, he stopped. That was a failure of a different kind. Tell me something, Harry said. If you'd made a different choice in 1981. No charms. Just the blood wards, just Privet Drive. What would I have been like at 11? When I got on the Hogwarts Express? Dumbledore considered this seriously, which Harry appreciated. More visible, he said at last. Considerably more powerful in raw terms. Almost certainly aware of things other children are not, the wards, the ambient magic, the deeper structures. More difficult to manage in a classroom setting. He paused. More equipped to survive what you have survived. Possibly, he paused longer. Possibly still with us. As in, several people who are not, might still be. This hit differently than everything else had. Hermione made a sound. Harry kept his face level. Cedric, he said. Dumbledore's eyes closed briefly. I have thought about that. For how long? Since the night it happened. And did thinking about it, Harry stopped. Started differently. Did it change what you did the following year? 5th year. Did it change anything about the charms you added when I came back to school in September? The pause before Dumbledore answered was very long. No, he said. No, Harry repeated. I told myself, I know what you told yourself, Harry said. You told yourself it was still necessary. That the risks of removing them outweighed the risks of keeping them. That you'd had a terrible year and the world had had a terrible year and this was not the moment to introduce an unknown variable. He looked at Dumbledore. And you were wrong. Yes, Dumbledore said. I was wrong. Bones, who had been quiet for a long time, spoke. Albus. I need to ask you directly. Did anyone else know? Anyone involved in the casting, the maintenance, or the decision-making? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. One person was aware that suppression measures had been applied, he said. They were not involved in the casting. They were told only that certain limiters were in place, for Harry's protection. They were not given specifics. Who? Bones asked. Another pause. Severus, Dumbledore said. Several things happened in the room at once. Ron said something under his breath that in different circumstances would have earned a reaction from Arthur. Hermione's quill started moving. Kendrick looked up from her notes. Arthur turned fully from the window. Harry was quiet. He was thinking about Snape. About potions lessons where Snape's eyes moved over him with that particular quality of attention that wasn't quite contempt and wasn't quite something else. About the occlumency lessons last year, where Snape had been brutal and efficient and occasionally something that might have been frustrated, not with Harry's incompetence but with something else, something Harry hadn't had the framework to identify. He was thinking about the fact that Snape knew there were limiters. Knew something fundamental about Harry was being held back. And had said nothing. Had instead chosen to continue treating him as the unremarkable, underperforming student that the limiters made him appear to be. He felt something about this. He held it for a moment and identified it. Not anger. Not betrayal. Something colder and more specific, the precise recognition that someone had chosen to see the suppressed version of him and use it against him for years, and had been able to tell themselves it was deserved. "All right," Harry said. Professor Snape knew there were limiters. He didn't know the scope, Dumbledore said. Did he know it was illegal? Bones asked. Dumbledore stopped. He did not ask, and I did not tell him. Convenient, Bones said. Dumbledore looked at her. Severus is complicated, Bones said crisply. I'm sure. I'll speak with him separately. She stood up from her stool. She was not tall, Amelia Bones, but she had the quality of someone who expanded to fill available authority, and at this moment she was filling quite a lot of it. Albus. I am not arresting you today. I want that to be clear, and I want the record to reflect that this is not because the evidence is insufficient or because your position affords you protection. I am not arresting you today because the investigation needs to be properly constructed before any formal action can take place, and because the active dismantling of Mr. Potter's suppressions is ongoing and I need to understand its full scope before I can assess complete harm. But I am formally advising you that you are a subject of this investigation. You will not leave the country. You will not contact Mr. Potter except through official channels during the investigation period. You will make yourself available for formal interview within 48 hours. She paused. Do you understand? Yes, Amelia, Dumbledore said. Do you dispute any of these conditions? No. She nodded once. Then I'm asking you to leave the hospital wing. Dumbledore rose from his chair. He was old in a way that was usually invisible, masked by the energy he carried, but right now, standing in the grey morning light of the sealed hospital wing, Harry could see the years on him clearly. Could see the weight of what he had just done, not the defense, not the justification, but the simple act of saying it aloud to the specific person he had done it to. He looked at Harry. There were 100 things in that look. Apology was one of them, but it was not the loudest. The loudest thing was something Harry recognized because he'd felt it himself this morning, when the first charm cracked. The expression of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just set it down, and cannot yet tell if the act of setting it down has made anything better. Harry met the look. Held it. I'm not finished with you, Harry said. But not today. Dumbledore nodded. He walked to the door, and Kendrick held it, and he left. The door closed. Ron sat down on the bed with some force. Right, he said. Right. Arthur crossed the room and put his hand on Ron's shoulder. His face, no longer needing to be neutral, was doing several things at once. He looked at Harry. I'm fine, Harry said. Harry, I mean it. Harry looked at his hands. The steady silver-gold light was still there. He felt the castle around him, felt Dumbledore's magical signature moving away down the corridor below, felt 49 remaining suppressions like knots in a rope, patient and waiting. I'm fine, he said again, and this time it was simpler, just true. He did what he did. He told us why he did it. I'm not going to fall apart because the why is understandable. Understandable isn't the same as right. It absolutely isn't, Hermione said, with a fierceness that she hadn't directed at anything all morning. Harry looked at her. She had tears in her eyes, which she appeared furious about. She was blinking them back with the aggressive efficiency she applied to most emotional responses that inconvenienced her. Hey, Harry said. Don't you hey me, she said. Don't you? She pressed her fingers to her eyes briefly. I sat next to you in charms for 5 years and I always thought you were holding back. That you could do more if you just focused, and I said that to you, I actually said that once, in third year. I told you that you needed to focus more. You were right, Harry said. Just for the wrong reasons. I blamed you, she said. Hermione. He waited until she looked at him. I blamed me too. We were both working with the same information. She breathed out. Set her parchment aside. Reached over and gripped his forearm for 3 seconds, which from Hermione was approximately the equivalent of a lengthy emotional speech. He put his hand over hers briefly. Then she picked her parchment back up and he turned back to the room. Bones was watching all of this. I have a question, Harry said to her. Several, I expect, she said. The hearing. When this goes to the Wisengamot, and it will, won't it? It will. Who decides what the outcome looks like? The charms being removed, the investigation into what happened, whatever the consequences are for the people responsible, he paused. Who controls that process? Bones studied him. Formally, the Wisengamot. Practically, whoever builds the strongest case and presents it most effectively. She paused. Why? Because I'm not interested in a process that makes decisions about my life without me in the room, Harry said. I've had enough of that. Bones looked at him for a long moment, and in her expression was the recalibrating look she'd been wearing since she walked in, and something else underneath it, something that might, in a different context, have been satisfaction. You'd want to testify, she said. I want to be central to it, Harry said. This is my life. I'll testify, I'll make a statement, I'll stand in front of the Wisengamot and say everything I've said in this room today, and I'll do it clearly and without anyone managing what I say or how I say it. But I need to know the structure I'm walking into. The structure, Bones said slowly, is one I can help you understand. Whether I can ensure the outcome, I'm not asking you to ensure the outcome, Harry said. I'm asking you to make sure the process is real. She looked at him for another moment. Then she closed her parchment notebook with a precise snap. The process, she said, will be real. Arthur made a sound that was exhale and approval combined. The 11th charm cracked at 12:30. This one was different from all the others. It didn't crack cleanly, it came apart in pieces over 40 seconds, a gradual, grinding dissolution, and what came with it was not a new sense or a sharpened skill but a memory. A specific, complete, crystalline memory that Harry had not known was missing. He was in a garden. Warm light. Green lawn. The smell of summer. And his mother's face, close to his, brown eyes laughing at something, her hair falling forward, and she was saying something to him and he could hear her voice, really hear it, not the echo from a dementor or the ghost of a thought, but the actual living voice of Lily Potter saying his name, and it was, he sat down on the bed. Ron was next to him without any decision being made about it. Arthur was nearby. Hermione's hand was on his back. He sat there for a moment with the memory and didn't say anything, and nobody asked him to. The light on his hands had gone very still. Steady. Warm. After a while, he looked up. She talked to me, he said. My mother. I had a memory of her and it was inside one of the charms. The charm was suppressing it. He stopped. How long had that memory been? Some suppression architectures can inadvertently seal associated memories, Pomfrey said, very quietly. The charms become entangled with specific neural magical pathways. When they release, she used to talk to me in the garden, Harry said. He looked at no one in particular. I remember her voice. Nobody said anything, and that was exactly right. Eventually, Harry straightened. He looked at Bones. I'm ready to finish the statement, he said. Bones looked at him steadily. There's no rush, I know, Harry said. I'm ready anyway. She opened her notebook. Outside, the rain had stopped. Through the opaque windows, the sealed world of the hospital wing had no way of knowing this, but Harry felt it, felt the shift in the ambient magic of the grounds, the way the castle's outer wards relaxed slightly when the weather eased, the faint change in the light beyond the stone. He could feel all of it. 49 charms remaining. He thought about his mother's voice, and the garden, and the specific, living weight of a memory returned. He thought about what else might be sealed inside the remaining 49. What else he had never known he was missing. He was going to find out. He wasn't afraid of any of it. Chapter 4, Fault Lines. The hospital wing unsealed at 3 in the afternoon. Not fully. Pomfrey kept the deeper privacy wards active and the windows opaque, but she dropped the quarantine lock and allowed the corridor to exist again, which meant that within 20 minutes of the seal lifting, Ginny Weasley was standing at the door with her arms crossed and an expression that communicated she had been standing in the corridor for considerably longer than 20 minutes. "I've been out there since 11, she said. "I know," Ron said. "I could feel you. What is happening?" She looked at Harry directly, not scanning the room first. "Because there are wards on this wing I've never felt before, and your hands are, Harry, your hands are glowing." "Come in," Harry said. "Close the door." Ginny came in and closed the door and sat on the end of the nearest bed and listened to the summary version with the focused, unhurried attention she applied to things that mattered. She didn't interrupt. She asked no questions until Harry finished. Then she said, very calmly, 53. 49 now, Harry said. "And Dumbledore, yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Right," she said. Then she looked at Pomfrey. Is the physical part safe? The charms cracking on their own, is that, controlled, as far as we can assess," Pomfrey said. "His core is managing the releases in sequence rather than all at once. It appears to have some innate intelligence about the pace." Ginny nodded and looked back at Harry, and there was something in her expression that was specific and private and she didn't try to make it anything else. "Does it hurt?" "No," Harry said. "The opposite." She looked at his hands for a moment. The silver gold light was steady, warmer since the memory had come back, and it shifted slightly when he moved, like sunlight on water. She looked at it the way she looked at things she found interesting rather than alarming. "That's incredible," she said simply. Harry looked at his hands. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Bones had been wrapping up the formal record in Pomfrey's office. She came out now with Kendrick behind her, both of them robed and organized. "I'll need to move back to the ministry for a few hours," she said. "The unspeakable consult needs to be coordinated and I have to brief my department before someone briefs them badly." She looked at Harry. "You will not be alone. Pomfrey has the case file, Arthur is staying, I'm not going anywhere," Arthur confirmed. "And I'll have 2 officers outside this corridor by nightfall." She paused. "Mr. Potter. Is there anything you need from me before I go?" "Snape," Harry said. Bones raised an eyebrow. He knew there were limiters. "I want to talk to him before you do." "That is not standard procedure." "I'm not asking for standard procedure," Harry said. "I'm asking to talk to someone in my own school before you put him in an official interview room and he goes fully defensive. Snape in a defensive position is useless to everyone." He met her gaze. "I'll tell you everything he says." Bones studied him with the look that had become familiar over the course of the day, reassessment, recalibration. "I can give you until 6 o'clock, she said. "If he hasn't been spoken to by then, I'm sending for him officially." "That's enough time," Harry said. She left with Kendrick. Arthur went to Pomfrey's office to use the flu. Ron started eating the lunch that had gone cold on the bedside table, because Ron processed stress with remarkable physical consistency. Hermione reopened her parchment. Ginny stayed where she was on the end of the bed. When the room was quiet enough she said, "Snape." "Yeah. You think he's going to be honest with you?" "I think he might be," Harry said, "if I give him the right reason to." He paused. He spent 5 years watching me through the lens of those charms. Seeing a below-average version of me and deciding that was character. I think the fact that it wasn't might matter to him. Even if he doesn't want it to. Ginny looked at him steadily. You're not angry at him. I'm not angry at anyone yet, Harry said. I keep saying that. You keep meaning it, she said. That's different. He looked at her. She looked back. There was something easy about it, the same ease there had always been, except that now the ease had more room in it because he had more room in him. I'll be back, he said. He looked at Hermione. Keep the record. Obviously, she said. He walked out of the hospital wing and into the castle. The first thing that happened when he stepped into the corridor was the castle itself. He'd been feeling it all day from inside the sealed wing, but inside the wing the wards had created a kind of insulation. Out here, in the open corridor with its old stone and its centuries of accumulated magical life, it hit him with the full force of something enormous being very, very glad to see him. He stopped walking and put his hand flat against the wall. The stone was warm. Not temperature warm, magically warm. Aware. He felt the building around him like a second body, its passages and chambers and its deep old heart, the foundational wards in the bedrock far below. And running through all of it like a thread, like a name whispered in a language you know without knowing how, a sense of recognition. The castle knew him. He stood there for a moment and let it know him, and the light on his hands ran up to his elbows, and he breathed in, and breathed out. Then he walked toward the dungeons. The dungeons were always slightly different from the rest of the castle, older in character, heavier, the stone carrying a different quality of magical accumulation. This was where Hogwarts stored its most complex and layered things, the potions classroom with its centuries of spilled and evaporated work, the Slytherin dormitories with their lake views, and at the far end of the lower level, Snape's personal laboratory. Harry could feel him from the staircase. A specific magical signature, tight and dense and complicated, like a fist that had been clenched for so long it had forgotten how to open. He knocked on the lab door. A pause. Enter. The laboratory smelled like silver and something astringent and the faint mineral quality of cold water. There were 6 cauldrons going at various stages of activity, which was either Snape's version of stress management or evidence that he'd been in here working steadily all day and had not been in his office when Dumbledore came back from the hospital wing. Snape was at the central bench. He was in his teaching robes, wand on the bench beside him, a cutting board in front of him and a silver knife in his hand. He did not look up immediately. Harry waited. Snape looked up. He looked at Harry's face first, which was interesting. Not the hands. Not the light. The face. He looked at Harry's face with the specific quality of attention he had deployed in potions classes for years, that dark, evaluating look that Harry had always read as contempt and which he now suspected was considerably more complicated. He looked at the hands second. At the steady silver-gold light, calm and clear in the dimness of the dungeon. He said nothing. You knew, Harry said. I knew there were limiters, Snape said. I did not know the scope, the method, or the specific effects. What did you know? Snape set down the silver knife with a precision that suggested he was deciding how to be precise with something else. I knew that Dumbledore had concerns about your power manifestation in early childhood. That he had taken steps to moderate it during your years away from the magical world. I was told this was temporary. A protective measure that would be removed when the time was right. When was the time right going to be? A pause. He was never specific. Did you ask? A longer pause. Once. And? He said it wasn't the right time yet, Snape said. I accepted that answer. He looked at the bench. That was a failure of judgment. Harry looked at him. Snape's face was doing its customary work of maintaining stillness, but the stillness was working harder than usual. It was the stillness of someone sitting very close to something that is very hot and refusing to move. You knew I was suppressed, Harry said. Not the details. But you knew something fundamental was being held back. And for 5 years you looked at me in your class. He paused. You looked at the limited version of me and you decided it was the real one. Snape said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. You decided it was the real one, Harry said, because it was easier. Because the limited version of me looked like my father, and you could treat him the way you wanted to treat him, and tell yourself it was deserved, and no one would correct you, because the version of me that could have called you on it, he gestured at his hands. Wasn't there. The dungeon was very quiet. One of the cauldrons made a low, settling sound. Snape's jaw had tightened. But he hadn't picked up the knife again. He was looking at the middle distance between them, and there was something in his expression that was rare and recognizable, the expression of a precise man encountering an argument he cannot immediately dismantle. You're correct, Snape said. The words landed without drama. Just 2 words, delivered in Snape's usual controlled tone, and completely unexpected. Harry waited. I was aware something was being suppressed, Snape said. I chose not to investigate. I chose not to push Dumbledore for specifics. I told myself it was not my concern. His eyes moved to Harry's face. In practice, I used what I saw to construct a conclusion that was convenient for me. That is, a brief pause, like something catching. That is not intellectually defensible. No, Harry agreed. It's not. What are you going to tell the DMLE? Snape asked. Everything, Harry said. I told Bones I'd talk to you first and tell her what you said. I'm going to keep that. He paused. I'm not here to give you a way out, Professor. I'm here to give you the chance to be honest before it becomes compelled. Because Bones is going to talk to you whether or not you talk to me, and the version where you've already chosen honesty is going to go better for you than the version where you haven't. Snape looked at him for a long time. The quality of the look had changed, the contempt, or what had always read as contempt, was absent from it. In its place was something Harry didn't have a clean name for. Not respect, exactly. More like the specific attention you gave something when you'd previously been looking at it through the wrong lens and the lens had just been corrected. When Dumbledore told me about the limiters, Snape said, carefully, I asked what would happen when they were removed. What you would become. He said he didn't know precisely, but that it would be significant. He paused. I remember thinking that a significantly powerful Harry Potter was, he stopped. Was what? Was something I was not prepared for, Snape said, and it was honest in the way that cost something. Harry looked at him. Were you afraid of me? No, Snape said immediately. Then, more slowly, I was afraid of what I would have to reconsider. He looked at the cauldron. If the boy I'd been teaching for 5 years was not the boy who actually existed, then a great deal of he stopped again. My assessments would require revision. Starting with? Harry asked. Snape was quiet for 3 seconds. Your competence, he said. Your father's legacy in you. Whether, he picked up the knife, looked at it, set it down again. Whether my treatment of you was ever deserved by the person who actually received it, regardless of who it was intended for. Harry was quiet for a moment. For the record, Harry said, I'm not James Potter. I never was. And the version of me you've been marking down for 5 years wasn't holding back to annoy you. I was doing the best I could with what I had. He paused. Which, it turns out, was significantly less than I actually have. Snape said nothing. I need you to tell Bones everything you told me, Harry said. I need you to tell her when Dumbledore told you, exactly what he said, and exactly what you asked and what he answered. Can you do that? Another long pause. Yes, Snape said. Good. Harry turned toward the door. Stopped. Professor. What? My potions work from the past 5 years, Harry said. Given what we now know about the diagnostic markers, the suppressed fine motor magical control, specifically, which Pomfrey confirmed was one of the charms, you might want to revisit those grades. He left without waiting for a response. The 12th charm cracked on the staircase going back up from the dungeons. This one arrived sideways, not through the chest but through the air around him, a sudden expansion of awareness, like someone turning up the resolution on the world. He grabbed the stone banister and stood still for a moment. The castle came into focus in a way it hadn't been even an hour ago, sharper and more layered, and he could feel things in the stones he hadn't been able to feel before. Old magic. Very old. In the walls, in the stairs, in the arched ceiling above him. He could feel memories in the stone. Not visual memories, more like impressions, the residue of things that had happened here over 6 centuries. Arguments, spells, fear, joy, the accumulated weight of 10,000 students who had walked these staircases and left their trace in the magic. He pressed his hand against the wall and felt it all at once, a wave of centuries, and then it receded to a manageable background hum, and he breathed and walked on. He was on the 2nd floor when the 13th cracked. This one was less subtle. He felt it release in his throat and his hands lit up to the elbows for about 4 seconds and every candle in the corridor flared. The suit of armor in the alcove to his right snapped to attention with a metallic clang. A group of third-year Hufflepuffs at the far end of the corridor stopped walking and stared. Harry looked at them. They looked at him. At his hands, his eyes, the lingering brightness in the candles. "Evening," he said, and walked on. He was 4 steps past them when he heard one of them whisper, with genuine reverence, "That's Harry Potter." He smiled, facing away, and took the stairs to the 4th floor. He was almost back to the hospital wing when he felt it, a presence in the castle moving fast from the headmaster's office toward the hospital wing via the route that bypassed the main corridors. He stopped on the 4th floor landing and felt its direction and specific magical quality. Not Dumbledore. Someone else. Someone dense with practiced concealment charms, moving quickly, and carrying a magical signature that felt like, he thought for a moment. Someone who worked in the ministry. Someone whose signature had the particular quality of someone who spent time around law and its application. Not Bones, he knew her signature now, had it catalogued from the day. Someone new. He turned and went directly to Pomfrey's private corridor, arriving at the side entrance to the hospital wing 30 seconds before the knock came at the main door. Pomfrey opened it. Cornelius Fudge stood in the doorway with 2 aurors Harry didn't recognize and an expression that was working very hard to convey authority. "Poppy," Fudge said, with the strained warmth of a man delivering a speech he'd prepared on short notice. "I came as soon as I heard. I want to assure you that the ministry is taking this situation completely. How did you hear?" Harry said. Fudge's eyes moved to him, and something happened in them, a quick recalibration, then a settling into the particular expression politicians wore when they found something they hadn't expected and needed 3 seconds to decide how to handle it. Harry was standing in the middle of the hospital wing with his arms at his sides and the steady silver light at his hands and his eyes clear as glass, and he looked, Fudge's expression suggested, nothing like the boy Fudge had spent the past year publicly dismissing as an attention-seeking delinquent. "Harry," Fudge said, with warmth that had been significantly revised in transit. The ministry has a deep concern for your well-being in this matter, and I want to personally assure you, how did you hear?" Harry said again, the same words at the same cadence. Fudge stopped. "I beg your pardon. Madam Bones is running this investigation under independent DMLE authority," Harry said. "She hadn't briefed the minister yet, by her own account, when she left here 2 hours ago. So someone told you before she did." He paused. "Who?" Fudge's mouth opened and closed. Behind him, one of the aurors was looking at the floor. "That is, there are various channels of, did Dumbledore contact you?" Harry asked. "I don't think this is the appropriate, because Madame Bones specifically told him not to contact anyone until her investigation was properly structured, Harry said. And if he contacted the minister directly, that would be a significant problem for how this case proceeds. Fudge looked at the Aurors. The Aurors looked at the wall. Arthur had come out of Pomfrey's office and was standing behind Harry with his arms crossed and his face doing something extremely restrained. The ministry has every right to be informed, Fudge began. Not before the DMLE head concludes her preliminary, Harry said. Not on a case she's opened under the independent charter provisions. You know those provisions, Minister. They predate your office by 400 years. Which means that arriving here before Bones has concluded her preliminary is either an accident, he paused deliberately, or an attempt to manage the situation before it becomes unmanageable. The hospital wing was very quiet. Ron was staring at Harry with his mouth slightly open. Even Hermione had paused her quill. Fudge's face had gone through several colors. He'd settled on a kind of fixed neutrality that was significantly less composed than he intended. Mr. Potter, he said, and the warmth had been entirely replaced by something more calculated. I understand you've had a difficult day. I've had a clarifying day, Harry said. There's a difference. He looked at the two Aurors. Are you here in an official capacity? Under whose orders? The Aurors exchanged a look. The taller one said, carefully, we were asked to accompany the minister as a personal escort, Fudge said firmly. Not on official business. Then you're here as a private citizen, Harry said to Fudge. In a space that is under investigation by the DMLE, which Madame Bones has authority over. And I don't particularly want a private citizen in here right now. He paused. No offense. The tone of the last two words was entirely sincere, which was somehow worse for Fudge than if it had been pointed. Fudge stared at him. Harry stared back, calm and clear. I will be speaking with Amelia, Fudge said, tightly. She'll welcome that, Harry said. She's at the ministry right now. He waited. Fudge left. The Aurors followed. The door closed. Arthur exhaled through his nose. Harry, he said. I know, Harry said. I know. He's the Minister for Magic. He was attempting to interfere with an investigation, Harry said simply. Into crimes committed against me. In a room I'm standing in. I'm 15 years old, not dead. Arthur looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected, he laughed. Brief, genuine, the laugh of a man surprised out of his restraint by something that was, despite everything, very funny. The 14th charm went at 4:30, and then nothing for nearly an hour. Harry used the time. He sat in the hospital wing with Ron and Hermione and Ginny and went through everything systematically, what each release had brought back, what the aggregate meant, what gaps he could still feel. Hermione's parchment had become a working document, organized by charm number, sensation, capability restored, and notes on the memory fragments that had come with the 11th. You said it felt like the castle recognized you, Hermione said, pen moving. The foundational ward specifically. Can you describe it more precisely? Like, Harry thought about it. Like being in a building where you grew up. Walking in and the building knowing your footstep. But you didn't grow up here, Ron said. My magic is older than me, Harry said. Not my personal magic. The Peveril line. Whatever came down through that. The foundational wards here are 600 years old. Whatever they're responding to in me might be older than the school. Hermione's quill stopped. That's, she said, genuinely extraordinary, Harry. I know. Like, world historically, I know. We should be much more alarmed than we are. Probably, Harry agreed. I'm not, though. Ginny was looking at him again. She had her knees pulled up on the bed, comfortable in the specific way she was comfortable everywhere, a person who took up space without apology. You know what I keep thinking, she said. I keep thinking about second year. When everyone thought you were the heir of Slytherin. When you could hear the voice in the walls and you thought it made you a monster. Harry looked at her. It wasn't a monster thing, she said. It was, you. What you are. Your magic was trying to communicate with the castle through the one channel it had left open, and everyone decided that made you frightening. She paused. You were just trying to find yourself in the building. Harry thought about the basilisk and the chamber and the voices in the pipes, and the way hearing them had felt like shame for an entire year, and he thought about what he could feel now with 47 charms still in place, the way Hogwarts spoke in every stone and every ward, in a language that his magic apparently spoke fluently. Yeah, he said quietly. That's right. The 15th charm released at 5:10 with a concussive pulse that sent every movable item in the hospital wing 3 feet to the left. Bed curtains snapped horizontal. Pomfrey's medical instruments went off their shelves. The windows cracked in their opacity and let in 2 blades of late afternoon light. Harry was on his feet. The pulse wasn't his, it was the charm itself, breaking under pressure from both ends, his magic pushing from inside and something about the castle's own wards pushing from outside. The 2 forces had met in the middle and the charm between them had simply given way. And what came with this one was not subtle. It was power. Not a quality, not a sense, not a skill, raw, undifferentiated, enormous power, flooding back through the suppression structure like water through a cracked dam. Harry stood in the middle of the hospital wing and felt it come, and his hands went from silver gold to full white light, and the windows blew fully clear, and outside the evening Hogwarts grounds were lit by something that was not the sun. Ron and Ginny and Hermione had all moved back, not in fear but in the instinctive physical respect of people standing close to something very large. Harry held his arms out slightly, palms down, and breathed. The light ebbed. The windows settled. The instruments on the floor did not go back to the shelves, but everything stopped moving. He stood there in the aftermath of it, chest heaving once, twice, and then steady. The candles in the room were all burning twice their normal height. They would continue to burn like that for the rest of the night. Right, said Ron, after a moment, in the tone of someone updating their internal model of the universe. Right. Pomfrey was already running the diagnostic. She ran it twice. She looked at the result and put her hand over her mouth briefly, then lowered it and composed herself. What? Harry said. Your baseline, she said. After the 15th release. Your baseline magical output has, she paused. It's higher than any reading I have on record for a student. Living or historical. She paused again. It's higher than most of the readings I have on record for fully trained adult wizards. The room was quiet. Harry looked at his hands. The white light had settled back to silver gold, steady, calm. He flexed his fingers. And there are 47 more to go, Hermione said. Yes, Pomfrey said. So this is, Hermione gestured at Harry. This is with more than 3/4 of the charms still in place. Yes. Harry lowered his hands. He thought about what Dumbledore had said, that the power the Dark Lord knew not was not just love, but this. Whatever this was. And he thought about Voldemort, back in his body now, gathering his forces, building toward something, unaware that the specific variable he'd tried to kill 14 years ago had spent this particular Tuesday recovering everything that had been taken from him. He thought, good. I need something to eat, he said, and I need to talk to Bones when she comes back. He looked at Pomfrey. Is there any reason I can't eat in here? I'll send to the kitchens, Pomfrey said. Also, Harry said, I want to write a letter. To who? Ron asked. Voldemort, Harry said. Everyone stared. I'm kidding, Harry said. Then he smiled at Hermione's expression. I want to write to the Dursleys. I want to say, he paused, working out what he actually wanted to say. I want them to know that I know, now, why they always looked at me the way they did. And that it makes more sense now. He paused again. And that I'm not angry at them. Because I'm not. You're not angry at anyone, Ron said, for what felt like the 5th time. I will be, Harry said. Just not yet. He sat back on the bed as the first plates of food appeared by house elf delivery on the bedside table. Right now I'm going to eat and wait for the 16th. He picked up a bread roll. Outside, the sun was going down over Hogwarts, and in the castle's ancient stone the foundational wards pulsed once, warm and deep, like something very old acknowledging that something very important had come home. Chapter 5, Open Water. Bones came back at 7 in the evening with 3 people Harry hadn't met and a folder thick enough to function as a weapon. The 3 people were, a slight, quiet woman named Dr. Evander Pell from the Department of Mysteries who wore no identifying insignia and introduced herself in the tone of someone who considered names a concession to social convention, a ministry cursebreaker named Thaddeus Crow who had the weathered, permanently alert quality of someone who spent most of his professional life in places that were actively trying to kill him, and a Wisengamot legal advocate named Isadora Vance who shook Harry's hand with the specific grip of a person who had spent decades in rooms where grip communicated competence. Bones took one look at the candles burning at twice their height and the scorched outline on the floor where the concussive pulse had happened and said, I see we had developments. 15th charm, Pomfrey said. At 5:10. Bones looked at Harry. At the steady luminescence, deeper now than it had been this morning, settled into something that felt less like a side effect and more like a permanent quality. How many remain? 47, Harry said. And your baseline output after 15 releases is, she looked at Pomfrey. Significant, Pomfrey said, which was the most controlled word anyone had used all day for something that was entirely uncontrolled. Crow the Cursebreaker had drifted toward the scorched floor outline and was crouching over it with his wand out, murmuring to himself. Pell from the Unspeakables was looking at Harry with the focused intensity of someone who had spent their career studying things that couldn't be categorized and had just found a new specimen. Vance was already talking quietly with Hermione, who had produced her parchment record and handed it over without being asked. Dr. Pell, Bones said, without looking at her. Pell came forward. She was 50s, fine-boned, with dark eyes that moved with the quality of something always computing. Mr. Potter, she said. I'd like to run a core assessment, if you're willing. Different from the healer's diagnostic. The Unspeakables have instruments calibrated for, she paused, searching for a word that was accurate without being sensational. For unusual core architectures. Go ahead, Harry said. She produced a small hexagonal device from her robes, not a wand, something older, made of bronze and crystal, the crystal currently dark. She held it up. This will take approximately 3 minutes. You'll feel it as a pressure, possibly as a sound in a frequency you don't normally hear. Don't resist it and don't push against it. She looked at him. If it becomes uncomfortable, I'll tell you, Harry said. She cast the assessment. It was nothing like Pomfrey's cascade of colors. This was a single thin beam of deep violet light that moved slowly across Harry's torso from sternum to spine, and when it reached his core the crystal at the center of the device went from dark to a color that Harry didn't have a clean name for. Not white. Not gold. Something between them that had its own quality, like the color of lightning at the exact moment before it struck. Pell looked at the crystal for a long time. Well, she said. Well, what? Ron said. Pell lowered the device. She looked at Bones. Are you recording? Every word, Bones said. Then for the record, Pell looked back at Harry. The core architecture I'm reading is consistent with what the theoretical literature describes as a sovereign-class magical alignment. It's been theorized in texts going back to the 12th century but never clinically documented in a living subject, because the consensus has been that the conditions required for its expression were, historically rare. She paused. The alignment describes a specific relationship between the individual magical core and ambient magical infrastructure. Specifically, foundational ward systems. The individual core doesn't just produce magic, it interacts with existing magical structures at the architectural level. Augmenting them, communicating with them, in some cases directing them. He can talk to the castle, Ginny said. Pell looked at her. More than talk, she said. With full expression, with all 47 remaining charms released, he'd be able to interface with Hogwarts' foundational wards as a co-architect. Not just feel them. Modify them. Reinforce them. Potentially extend them. She looked back at Harry. Hogwarts hasn't had a headmaster capable of that level of ward interaction since its founders. The room processed this. Since the founders, Hermione said, very quietly, with the tone she reserved for things that were both extraordinary and deeply, logically consistent with everything she knew. The Peverell line, Harry said. Yes, Pell said. The Peverell family were, among other things, significantly involved in the original ward architecture of several major magical sites in Britain. Including this one. She looked at him steadily. What you are, Mr. Potter, is not a mutation or an anomaly. You're an inheritance. A very specific, very old one that manifested in full for the first time in several centuries. And someone put 53 suppression charms on it, Arthur said, from the corner, in a voice like someone measuring each word with a scale. Yes, Pell said. Someone did. The quiet that followed had a specific quality, the quality of a room full of intelligent people individually completing the same calculation and arriving at the same conclusion about the magnitude of what had been done. Harry let them sit in it for a moment. Then he said, "What happens at full expression? When all 47 go?" Pell looked at Bones. Bones gave a slight nod. At full expression, Pell said, you will be the most powerful active magical practitioner currently alive. She said it without drama, because drama would have been redundant. By a significant margin. Ron sat down heavily on the nearest bed. Right, he said, in the voice of a man whose internal model of the universe was being revised for the second time today. Right, okay. I need some air, Harry said. Bones started to say something. Not a request, Harry said. I'm going outside for 20 minutes. I need to be outside. He looked at her. You can send someone with me. I'm not going anywhere. I just need to be outside. She looked at him for a moment. Crow, she said. Crow was already upright from his crouch over the floor outline. Ready. They went out through the side corridor and the servants' passage that Pomfrey had shown Harry 2 years ago, coming out on the broad stone terrace off the east side of the castle that looked over the lake. The evening was clear after the day's rain, the sky going deep blue at the horizon and lighter above, and the lake was perfectly still and reflecting both colors. Crow walked to the far end of the terrace and stood with his hands in his pockets and his back turned in a way that was professionally tactful. Present and watchful, not intrusive. Harry stood at the stone parapet and put both hands on it and looked at the lake. He breathed in. The castle behind him was alive in a way he'd never felt before today, its magic moving against his back like warmth. The lake ahead of him had its own ambient magical quality, decades of memory and depth, and below the surface he could sense, not see, not quite feel, but sense, the giant squid's enormous slow presence, and deeper than that, the enchantments laid into the lakebed in the school's founding years. He could feel the forbidden forest at the edge of his awareness, dense and complex and ancient, a knot of magical signatures so layered and various they were almost white noise. He could feel every person in the castle. Not individually catalogued, not yet, but as a warmth, a population of distinct magical signatures, the students in their dormitories and the professors in their quarters and the house elves moving through the back passages with their quick, specific energy. He could feel Ron, specifically, through the hospital wing walls. Dense and solid and loyal, like a warm stone. He could feel Hermione, bright and ordered, already moving through the information Pell had provided. He could feel Ginny, which was different from feeling either of them, warmer and less definable, the way a fire felt different from a lamp even when both gave light. He stood there for a while and let himself feel all of it, and he thought about what Pell had said. The most powerful active magical practitioner currently alive. He turned the phrase over. Examined it. Waited to feel something about it, fear, elation, vertigo, any of the things he'd apparently be expected to feel. What he felt instead was that it explained a lot. It explained the sorting hat and the basilisk and the Patronus at 13 and the graveyard and all the times he'd reached for something and found it, the times his magic had acted as if the ceiling he'd always felt was just, not there. It explained the pressure in his chest that he'd lived with so long he'd stopped calling it a symptom. It didn't make him feel powerful. It made him feel recognized. Like meeting his own reflection in an unexpected place and finding it accurate. Sovereign class, he said, to the lake. Right. First time I've heard that term used in a clinical context, Crow said, from the far end of the terrace. Still not turning around. Have you heard it before? In old texts, Crow said. From site assessments. When you're evaluating ancient wards and you find evidence of a particular kind of interaction pattern, a co-architectural interface, the old curse breakers used to mark it in the records. Sovereign touch. Meaning someone with the right alignment was here and left their signature in the foundation. He paused. I've seen those marks in Hogwarts lower records. In the foundation assessments. There are marks going back to the original construction and then nothing after the 15th century. He finally turned around, and his face in the evening light was thoughtful. Until the last 5 years. Harry looked at him. You've been leaving your mark in the foundation every year, Crow said. Even suppressed. Every year you spent in this castle, your core was interacting with the foundational wards at the level below what the charms could fully contain. The wards have been adapting to you. He paused. This castle has been building a relationship with you for 5 years, Mr. Potter. While you were unaware of it. Harry turned back to the lake. How is Voldemort going to feel about that? He said. Crow was quiet for a moment. I imagine, he said, exactly how you'd expect him to feel. Good, Harry said. He straightened up from the parapet. All right, he said. Let's go back. They went back. The 16th charm cracked on the terrace stairs and the 17th went in the corridor, and by the time Harry walked back into the hospital wing the light on his hands was bright enough that Pell's bronze device was vibrating in her pocket and she had to take it out and hold it flat on her palm. 2 more, Hermione said, looking up. What do you feel? Pell asked, with the focused attention of the professionally fascinated. The wards, Harry said. The foundational ones. They're clearer now. More, reciprocal. He looked at the floor. The castle is, I don't know how to say this without sounding strange. Strange stopped mattering about 8 hours ago, Ron said. The castle is pleased, Harry said. Pell looked at the vibrating device in her palm with undisguised professional delight. Yes, she said. That would be consistent. Vance looked up from where she'd been reviewing Hermione's parchment with a focused frown. Mr. Potter. I need to talk to you about the legal structure of what's coming. Harry sat on the bed. Go ahead. Vance was a compact woman in her 60s, methodical and direct, with the quality of someone who had spent a career translating complicated realities into forms that institutions could act on. She sat across from him and put Hermione's parchment on the table between them. The hearing is going to be a full Wiesengemot session, she said. Not a tribunal. Bones is insisting on the highest forum because anything less invites appeal and she wants this to be final. She paused. The charges under consideration are, illegal application of suppression charms to a minor, sustained over a period of 14 years, unauthorized modification of a minor's magical core, misuse of institutional ward infrastructure for targeted personal spellcasting, and, potentially, conspiracy to suppress material evidence affecting a matter of public safety. That last one refers to the suppression as it relates to the prophecy and the war with Voldemort. Harry took this in. Conspiracy with whom? The Dursleys, potentially, if they were knowingly complicit. And, she paused. There is a question about who else in Dumbledore's circle knew enough to constitute complicity. Your Professor Snape's account this afternoon is going to be important. He'll tell you what he told me, Harry said. He said he would. I know. Bones spoke with him this evening before she came back. Vance was quiet for a moment. His account was honest. Damaging to Dumbledore, but honest. She paused. Which, given Professor Snape's history of selective disclosure, suggests that whatever you said to him in the dungeons this afternoon was fairly significant. I just told him the truth, Harry said. Vance looked at him for a moment. Evidently. She tapped the parchment. Now. The hearing itself. You will be asked to testify. I will advise you on format and procedure. But there is something you need to understand before we get to that. She met his gaze squarely. The Wisengamot is a political body as well as a judicial one. Not everyone on it will be approaching this in good faith. Some members will be looking for a way to limit the damage to Dumbledore's reputation because his reputation is load-bearing for their own positions. Others will want to use it to attack the Ministry because it suits their agenda. Others still, she paused. Others will look at what you are, as of today, and decide that the primary question is not what was done to you but what you represent going forward and how to manage it. They'll want to control the variable, Harry said. Yes, Vance said. Different people, different methods, same instinct. She looked at him steadily. I need to know that when you're in that room, with all of those pressures and agendas and the full weight of the wizarding world's institutional machinery pointed at you, she paused. I need to know you won't let anyone in that room manage what you say or how you say it. Harry looked at her. That, he said, is genuinely not going to be a problem. She held his gaze for another moment. Then something in her professional expression shifted, not softened, but the specific shift of a person who has assessed a situation and found it adequate. No, she said. I don't think it is. The night deepened. Arthur fled home to collect overnight things and came back. Ron and Ginny went to the kitchens and returned with enough food for everyone, which was the Weasley response to crisis that Harry found deeply comforting. Hermione organized the document situation, which now involved 3 separate parchment sets in 3 separate protective cases. Pell sat in a corner and made notes. Crow went back to the corridor and walked the stretch outside the hospital wing, feeling the wards. Bones called Harry to Pomfrey's office at 9 o'clock. The office was small and warm, smelling of the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling and the lamp oil Pomfrey used. Bones sat across the desk from Harry and Vance sat to the side, and Bones put her folder down and opened it to a specific page. The 18th and 19th charms have now gone, she said. Pomfrey confirmed. You're at 35 remaining. She looked at him. I want to talk about timeline. Specifically, I want to talk about custody. Harry looked at her. You are a minor, Bones said. 15 years old. Under normal circumstances, Hogwarts represents your legal place of residence during term time, under Dumbledore's authority as headmaster. With Dumbledore as the primary subject of the investigation, she paused. His authority as your legal guardian during term is compromised. I need to establish an alternative custody arrangement effective immediately. Arthur, Harry said. He's willing, Bones said. He came to me before you did. But there's a ministry component to this as well. Given what Pell's assessment indicates about your capabilities, there will be pressure, significant pressure, to establish some form of ministry oversight or custody parallel to the private arrangement. No, Harry said. Bones looked at him. I want to be clear about what you'd be declining, ministry oversight of me, Harry said. After a day in which the Minister for Magic showed up uninvited to manage a crime scene and couldn't tell me honestly who sent him. No. He paused. Arthur Weasley custody during the investigation period. That's what I want. The Ministry will push back, Bones said. The Ministry can push whatever it wants, Harry said. What legal mechanism does it have to compel an alternative custody arrangement against my stated preference and against the DMLE's recommendation? Bones looked at Vance. None that would survive a challenge, Vance said, if the challenge is made before the arrangement is finalized. Then finalize it, Harry said. Tonight. Bones looked at him for a long moment. Not the recalibrating look, this time. Something more like respect, which from Amelia Bones was not a small thing. There's one more thing, she said. The news. Harry had been waiting for this. The sealed wing only stayed sealed in the official sense, Bones said. We have had no leaks from this room. But the events of the day were not invisible. The lights on the grounds this afternoon, the pulse at 5:10 was visible from Hogsmeade. Crow confirmed that the magical output registered on the Ministry's ambient detection instruments at a level that would have triggered a review. She paused. We have perhaps 12 hours before someone publishes something. Possibly less. The Prophet will have sources in the Ministry that I cannot fully control. What are my options? Harry said. You could give a statement preemptively. Control the first version of the story. Or let it develop without comment and respond when the hearing provides a proper platform. Or Harry said again. Bones tilted her head slightly, which meant she'd been waiting for a third option from him. We tell Hermione Granger to write something up tonight, Harry said. Not an official statement. Not a press release. A factual account, written in her voice, covering what happened here today and why, and we give it to a journalist we trust, not the Prophet, before anyone else publishes anything. He paused. Luna Lovegood's father runs the Quibbler. The Quibbler, Bones said, with the careful neutrality of a woman who had a professional relationship with credibility. The Prophet ran a year-long campaign claiming I was lying about Voldemort returning, Harry said. The Quibbler ran my interview when no one else would. I trust Xenophilius Lovegood to print what's actually true without editorializing it into something different. He paused. And the Quibbler publishing it first means the Prophet has to respond to the story rather than define it. Bones considered this. That's not a bad piece of communication strategy, Vance said, with something that might have been approval. Hermione's been keeping a record all day, Harry said. She already has a document. We just need to shape it. Bones closed her folder. Do it, she said. Have it ready by midnight. She stood. Mr. Potter. Tomorrow will be more complicated than today. I know. The Wisengamot date isn't confirmed yet, but given the profile of this case it will be soon. Within a week, possibly less. She looked at him. Between now and then, you will be under considerable observation. Every person with a stake in the outcome of this investigation will be watching how you conduct yourself. Every choice you make will be interpreted through whatever lens is most convenient for whoever is watching. She paused. I'm telling you this not as advice on how to behave. I'm telling you so you understand the terrain. Understood, Harry said. She left. Harry sat in Pomfrey's office for a moment in the herb-scented warmth. He thought about the hearing, about the Wisengamot, about Fudge's face this afternoon and the two Aurors looking at the floor. He thought about Dumbledore's expression when he'd asked about the time that was right. He thought about Pell's assessment and what it meant and what Voldemort was doing right now, wherever he was, unaware that the calculation he'd built his return on had just been revised significantly. He thought about his mother's voice in the garden. He went back out to the hospital wing and sat beside Hermione and said, "We need to write something." She already had fresh parchment out. "I know," she said. "I've been thinking about how to start it." How? She read from the page. Yesterday morning, Madame Pomfrey ran a routine diagnostic on Harry Potter. What she found was not routine. Harry looked at the sentence. Yeah, he said. That's right. Keep going. She wrote. Harry talked. Ron kept the tea coming, which was his contribution, and it was not a small one. Ginny read over their shoulders and suggested 2 changes that improved the whole thing significantly, both of which Hermione adopted without argument. At midnight, Hermione put down the quill and they read through the full draft. It was 6 pages. It contained every relevant fact from the day: Pomfrey's diagnostic, the number of charms, the dates, Dumbledore's admission, Bones' investigation, Pell's sovereign class assessment, Fudge's unauthorized visit. It was written in Hermione's clear, precise voice, which meant it read as completely credible and also made every person implicated in what had happened look exactly as responsible as they were. Send it, Harry said. A school owl was sent to the Quibbler's offices with a letter to Xenophilius Lovegood and the document attached. They asked for publication by morning. The reply came at 12:45. Running it as the front page. First edition at 6. Good luck, Harry. XL Harry held the reply note and looked at it. It's out of our hands now, Ron said. Good, Harry said. It was never really in them. He set the note down. Get some sleep. Both of you. He looked at Hermione. You too, Ginny. You're not going to sleep, Ron said. Probably not, Harry agreed. But you should. They argued about this for a few minutes and then all 3 of them fell asleep on hospital wing beds anyway, because it was 1 in the morning and they were 15 and they'd had the kind of day that caught up with you whether you planned for it or not. Harry sat awake. He felt the castle breathe around him. Sometime around 2 in the morning, with 31 charms remaining, the 20th cracked and then the 21st, and then 3 more in quick succession, 22, 23, 24, and Harry sat very still in the candlelit dark and let the wave of release move through him and paid careful attention to each one. Tactile awareness. Projection, the ability to cast without physical gesture. Combat instinct, deep and old in the Peveril line, dormant for centuries. Ward reading, full spectrum. And one that had no clinical name, that Pomfrey had no category for, the sense Pell had gestured at in her assessment, the quality of a person whose core and the world's infrastructure spoke the same language. He sat in the candlelit dark of the hospital wing with 29 charms remaining and his friends sleeping and the castle breathing around him, and he was, for the first time in his life, the full size of himself. Not complete. Not yet. But closer. He raised his right hand. He didn't reach for a spell. He didn't focus, didn't aim, didn't use the vocabulary of formal casting. He just let what was there come up. The light that rose from his palm was different from everything the day had produced. Not the silver gold of the earlier releases, not the concussive white of the 15th. This was something quieter and more fundamental, a warm, deep luminescence that moved like sunlight through water, and it rose from his hand and spread to the walls and the ceiling and lit the hospital wing in something that was not quite light and not quite magic but was both. Pell's bronze device, sitting on the table across the room, sang a single clear note and went quiet. Every candle in the room went out. His light was enough. Harry lowered his hand. The light settled back. He thought about tomorrow. About the Quibbler's front page and Bones' return and the Wisengamot date being set and Fudge and Dumbledore and Snape and the 31 charms still to go and Voldemort somewhere in the dark making plans with incomplete information. He thought, let them come. Not with anger. Not with bravado. Just the simple, grounded certainty of someone who knows the full size of what they're standing on for the first time. Outside, Hogwarts slept, its foundational wards deep and warm and awake in the way they had been awake for 5 years, patient and certain, waiting for exactly this. Chapter 6, The Name You Choose. The Quibbler hit Hogwarts at 6:15 in the morning. Not physically, The owls arrived at the usual time and most students were still asleep, but the magical edition, the one Xenophilius Lovegood had started running 2 years ago that delivered to paying subscribers via enchanted paperfold, arrived on breakfast tables and dormitory windowsills with the quiet insistence of something that knew it was important. By 7, the Great Hall was a different room than it had been the day before. Harry knew this before he left the hospital wing, because he could feel the shift, not the content of it, not individual conversations, but the ambient quality of the castle's population, a kind of heightened electrical attention that moved through corridors and up staircases and arrived at the hospital wing door as a changed pressure in the air. "It's out," he said to Ron, who was standing at the window eating toast that had arrived via house elf 20 minutes ago. "Yeah," Ron said. He'd been awake for an hour, and he had the expression he wore after a long chess game, everything assessed, positions mapped, the board understood. "The whole castle knows. How do you think they're taking it?" Ron chewed toast and thought about it honestly. "Gryffindors, angry on your behalf, the way they always are, which means loud. Ravenclaws, picking it apart for detail, which means quiet and intense. Hufflepuffs," he considered. "Hufflepuffs are probably the ones I'd be most worried about." "Why?" "Because they've been told for 5 years that you're either lying or unstable," Ron said. "And now they're finding out you were, the whole time, being held back by someone they trusted. That's a specific kind of betrayed." He looked at Harry. "Slytherins are a separate question." "They'll wait," Harry said. "They'll see which way it lands before they commit." "Yeah," Ron said. "That's about right." Hermione had been awake since 5:30, had already read the published piece twice, and had a specific expression that meant she had opinions about the editorial choices Lovegood had made. "He added 3 sentences at the end," she said. "I didn't write those. They're florid." "What do they say?" Harry asked. She read them with the precision of someone who found florid professionally offensive. The question facing the wizarding world today is not whether Harry Potter is powerful. The question is whether those who held the keys to that power deserve to have been trusted with it. The answer, as of this morning, appears to be a clear and resounding no. The hospital wing was quiet for a moment. "I mean," Ginny said, from the bed where she'd been awake long enough to have eaten breakfast and braided her hair, "he's not wrong." Bones arrived at 7:45 with Vance, Kendrick, and a man Harry hadn't seen before, tall, formal, wearing the Wisengamot's official seal on his lapel, which meant he was carrying something that required that identification. He carried an official summons document in a sealed blue envelope. "The hearing is set," Bones said, before she'd fully crossed the threshold. "When?" Harry asked. "Thursday," she said. 2 days. The room absorbed this. "That's fast," Arthur said. He'd come back at 6 in the morning, slightly rumpled from the early flu, and had been quietly present since then, drinking tea and reading the Quibbler piece with an expression that moved through several things and settled on something that looked like resolution. "It's fast because I pushed for it," Bones said. "The longer this case sits open, the more time various parties have to apply pressure to various Wisengamot members. Fast is in our interest." She sat down. "However, fast also means preparation time is limited." She looked at Harry. "Walk me through where you are." 29 remaining, Harry said. "Down from 47 last night. 12 went between midnight and 4 in the morning." He paused. "I can feel them as they go now. It's less disruptive than the earlier ones. They're coming off in sequence and the magic is absorbing them without the physical pulse." "Any new capabilities manifest?" "Projection," Harry said. "I can cast without gesture. And ward reading at full spectrum. I can feel every ward in this building clearly enough to describe them individually." He paused. "And something Pell called combat instinct, which sounds dramatic but mostly means I can feel the shape of a hostile spell before it arrives." Bones looked at him for a moment. "You said that simply." Because it is simple, Harry said. It's not dramatic. It's just, there. It was always supposed to be there. Bones made a note. For the hearing, she said, you will be seated in the primary witness chair. Not the accused chair, witness. The distinction matters. You are not on trial. This is not about whether what happened to you was harmful. It's about assigning responsibility and establishing consequence. She looked at him. Dumbledore will be there. He's been formally interviewed and his statement is part of the record. He has retained Wizengamot representation, Aldred Gorse, who is technically excellent and personally irritating. Vance will guide you on procedure, but I want to say something outside the procedural framework. She set her pen down, which he'd learned was her signal for when she was speaking as a person rather than an officer. When you're in that room, she said, you will be asked questions by people whose purpose is to make the story smaller than it is. They will suggest that Dumbledore acted in good faith and that good faith is sufficient defense. They will suggest that the outcomes, you alive, Voldemort initially defeated, justify the means. Some of them will believe this sincerely. She paused. Your job in that room is not to argue their framing. It's to answer the questions you're actually being asked, clearly and without performance, and let the facts do the work. I know, Harry said. People will be watching how you handle it, Vance added. Not just the Wizengamot. The public. The Quibbler piece is already circulating beyond the school. We had confirmation an hour ago that it's been reprinted in 14 European magical publications overnight. The international wizarding community has an interest in this case. Of course they do, Hermione said, without looking up from the parchment she was annotating. It's the most significant case of illegal magical modification of a minor in 200 years, involving the most prominent living wizard and the person who ended the last war. Naturally everyone's interested. 14 publications, Ron said. Overnight. The Quibbler, Hermione said, with some satisfaction, was apparently the right call. The 20th through 29th charms continued their rolling release through the morning, not all at once, not in dramatic pulses, but in the steady sequence that had characterized the night, each one coming loose as though the architecture of suppression was beginning to understand that it had lost. By 10 o'clock Harry was down to 21 remaining and the light from his hands had become something that simply existed, unremarked by anyone in the room because they had all recalibrated to it. What was harder to ignore was what happened to the hospital wing itself. Around 9 in the morning, the foundational wards of Hogwarts did something they had apparently not done in 6 centuries, which was reassert a direct, active interface with a specific individual within the building. This looked, from the outside, like the walls of the hospital wing running with a slow, golden light at the seam between stone and mortar. It looked, from Harry's perspective, like being handed a very old set of keys and understanding immediately what they opened. Pell had arrived back at 9:15 and spent 3 minutes staring at the walls before she said, in the specific tone of a person working hard not to use exclamation points, that's never been documented in a contemporary setting. How does it feel? Crow asked Harry. Natural, Harry said, which was the honest answer and the most alarming one. Pell wrote approximately 4 pages of notes in 20 minutes. She had abandoned professional composure entirely in favor of professional rapture, which was its own category of intensity. At 11 o'clock, McGonagall came. She knocked, waited, and when Pomfrey opened the door she stood in the frame and looked at the room, at Bones and the legal team and the documents and the glowing walls and Harry in the center of all of it, with the expression of a woman recalculating a life's worth of assumptions in real time. Poppy, she said. May I come in? Of course, Minerva, Pomfrey said. McGonagall came in, and she looked at Harry, and Harry looked at her, and between them was 5 years of something that had always been mutual respect navigating around an unspoken imbalance, because Harry had always been, to McGonagall, a bright student with frustrating potential and a concerning amount of danger directed at him, and she had clearly been operating on incomplete information. I read the piece, she said. Most people have, Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. I want to say something, she said, and I want you to let me say it without interrupting. All right, Harry said. I have watched you for 5 years, McGonagall said. I have watched you perform below what your testing suggested you should, and I attributed it to inconsistency of focus and the pressure of your circumstances. I graded your practical work against a standard that, had I known what was suppressing it, I would never have applied. She paused. I knew that something in Dumbledore's plans for you was not, I had concerns, over the years, that the weight placed on you was not proportionate to the support provided. I raised these concerns. They were not acted on. She met his gaze squarely. I should have raised them louder and I should have been more specific about what I suspected. That is a failure I own. Harry held her gaze. You're not responsible for what he did, he said. No, McGonagall said. But I am responsible for what I didn't do. She straightened, which for McGonagall was its own kind of declaration. I will be at the hearing. I will testify to your academic record and my assessment of the suppression's effects on your development, if you want me there. I want you there, Harry said. She nodded once, the decisive nod of someone who has made a commitment and intends to keep it. She looked at the golden light moving through the walls for a moment. Extraordinary, she said quietly, and there was nothing in her voice except genuine, unguarded wonder. Then she walked out, back straight, and closed the door behind her. I love that woman, Ginny said. Yeah, Harry agreed. The hearing was set for Thursday at 10 in the morning, in the main Wisengamot chamber at the Ministry of Magic. On Wednesday afternoon, with 17 charms remaining, Bones formally transferred Harry's term-time custody to Arthur Weasley. The paperwork was filed, witnessed, and sealed before Fudge's office sent a letter questioning the procedural basis for the arrangement, which Vance addressed in 3 sentences that amounted to a polite legal instruction to look elsewhere. Harry left Hogwarts for the first time since the discovery on Wednesday evening, stepping through the main gates with Arthur and Ron and Hermione and Ginny and Bones 2 officers trailing at a professional distance. The walk from the gate to the edge of the apparition boundary was only 200 yards, but it was the first time Harry had walked it without the ceiling, without the pressure, without the invisible weight that he'd spent 15 years mistaking for the natural atmosphere of his own existence. The evening air was cool and clear and the sky above the Hogwarts grounds was showing its first stars. He stopped halfway down the path. All right? Ginny said, coming up beside him. He was looking up at the castle. At the lit windows and the towers and the dark mass of it against the evening sky, and the faint golden pulse at its foundations that was new tonight and his. I've never seen it from outside like this, he said. With this, he didn't finish the sentence, because the sensation was too specific to translate. The building knew he was moving away from it, in the specific, non-anxious way of something very old that understood the concept of returning. Like it was already waiting for Thursday morning. It'll be there when you come back, Ginny said. Yeah, he said. I know. They apparat to the burrow, and that evening Molly Weasley made enough food for a small army and cried once, briefly, in the kitchen, and then came out with red eyes and a perfectly composed expression and set everything on the table and said nothing about it, which was its own kind of love and Harry felt it precisely. He slept better than he had in years. Thursday arrived. Harry dressed in clean robes, dark and unremarkable, because the point was not appearance and never had been. He ate breakfast at the Burrow table with Arthur and Molly and Ron and Hermione and Ginny, and the conversation was ordinary in the specific way that people make conversation ordinary when they love each other and the day ahead is large. Remember, Arthur said, over his tea, you don't have to perform anything. I know, Harry said. And you don't have to manage how anyone in that room feels about what they hear. I know. And if at any point, Arthur, Harry said, and his voice was warm. I know. Arthur looked at him across the table, at the steady clear-eyed 15-year-old sitting in the morning light of the Burrow's kitchen with a magical core of incomprehensible scope and the most thoroughly documented case of systematic suppression in wizarding history waiting to be heard, and he nodded slowly. Yes, he said. You do, don't you?" Molly reached over and squeezed Harry's hand once, very firmly, and let go. They flew to the Ministry at 9. The atrium of the Ministry of Magic was always theatrical, but today it had a specific quality of attention that Harry felt from the moment his feet hit the golden floor. 100 people who had found reasons to be in the atrium at 9 in the morning on a Thursday, which meant they were there to watch, or to be seen watching, or to assess. Harry walked through the atrium beside Arthur with Vance on his other side and Ron and Hermione 2 steps back, and he was aware of being looked at in a way that was entirely different from the looked-at feeling of 5 years of wizarding fame. This was not the look that said boy who lived. This was the look that said the story was true and he's larger than we thought, and Harry let it move past him without engaging it. He kept his hands at his sides. The silver-gold luminescence was present but quiet, the way it always was now, not performing, not suppressed, just there. Someone in the crowd said his name. Then someone else. By the time they reached the lift, the atrium had gone from theatrically attentive to the particular silence that fell when a room decided something significant was happening. Harry stepped into the lift. The doors closed. He looked at his reflection in the polished metal. Same face. Same scar. Clearer eyes than the boy who'd been on a broom in the rain 48 hours ago. "You're calm," Hermione said, from beside him. "Yes," Harry said. "Is that going to read badly in the chamber?" "People might expect, I know what they might expect," Harry said. "They'll manage." The Wizengamot chamber was built for weight. Not height, not grandeur in the ornamental sense, weight, the accumulation of centuries of consequential decisions pressing down through the stone of the walls and the floor. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle of tiered levels, 50 seats currently occupied by 50 witches and wizards in plum-colored robes, and below them the witness chair and the accused chair and the large open floor where the principal parties stood. Harry came in and felt the chamber settle around him the way the hospital wing had settled on Tuesday morning, with the specific recognition of something old acknowledging something it had been waiting for. He sat in the witness chair. Dumbledore was already present, seated in the respondents' area with his representation, Aldred Gorse, beside him. He looked, across the chamber, at Harry, and Harry looked back at him with nothing hostile in his face, nothing performed, simply the clear-eyed attention of someone who understood what was happening and was present for all of it. Dumbledore looked away first. Chief Warlock Tiberius Ogden called the session to order at 10 o'clock precisely, and the formal reading of the charges took 12 minutes and filled the chamber's acoustic space with the specific dry weight of official language wrapping around something that had been, at its core, both intimate and enormous. Bones presented the evidentiary record. She was methodical and she was devastating, in the specific way of a person who has never needed to raise her voice because the facts were loud enough. She walked the Wizengamot through every diagnostic finding, every date, every layer of the suppression architecture. She presented Pell's assessment with its clinical language and its non-clinical implications. She presented Snape's testimony, which several members of the Wizengamot clearly had not expected and which moved through the chamber like a cold current. She presented McGonagall's assessment of Harry's academic record alongside Pomfrey's diagnostic data, which produced the first real reaction from the floor, a kind of collective arithmetic being done in real time as people looked at the chart of his suppressed output against his actual performance and understood what they were seeing. He had been achieving, under suppression, what an unsuppressed student might have considered adequate. Which meant the effort he'd been putting in for 5 years, the ceiling he'd been pushing against, had been generating results that were being marked as merely decent, because nobody knew the ceiling was artificial. 3 members of the left tier looked at each other in a way that suggested they were revising opinions. Gorse cross-examined Pomfrey and Pell with technical precision and genuine skill, trying to establish that the suppression architecture could be interpreted as protective rather than harmful in its effect. He was not wrong that it could be framed that way. He was, however, working against a very clear factual record, and his arguments were the kind that were technically defensible and morally untenable, which was a difficult position to hold convincingly. Then Ogden said, "We'll hear from Harry Potter." Harry stood. He walked to the witness position. He stood in the center of the floor with the 50 seats curved around him and Dumbledore in his peripheral vision, and the full institutional weight of the wizarding world focused on this particular point in space. He wasn't afraid of any of it. He hadn't been afraid of it since Tuesday morning, when the first charm cracked and something in him had recognized that the appropriate response to the truth was not fear but attention. "Mr. Potter," Ogden said. "You've heard the charges and the evidentiary record. I want to give you the opportunity to speak to your own experience. In your own words, without procedural constraint. Take as long as you need." Harry looked at the chamber. "I'm going to keep it short," he said, and the chamber acoustics took his voice and gave it back to him from 50 directions, clean and clear. "Because the facts have already been laid out more precisely than I could manage, and I don't have anything to add to the diagnostic record." He paused. "What I want to say is this." He looked at the chamber. Not at any individual face, at the whole. "I grew up believing I was ordinary," he said. Not ordinary in the way most people mean it. "I grew up in a house where I was told, explicitly and consistently, that there was nothing remarkable about me. That whatever strange things happened around me were accidents or embarrassments. That the best thing I could be was quiet and contained and not a problem." He paused. "I believed it. I had no reason not to. I was 11 years old when I found out I was a wizard, and I was so relieved to have an explanation for all of it that I walked into this world with an enormous amount of gratitude and a corresponding amount of trust." He looked at Dumbledore now, directly. "I trusted the people who'd built this world," he said. "I trusted the school, and the headmaster, and the structures that were supposed to be there for me. And for 5 years, that trust was the mechanism by which the suppression was maintained. Not through force. Not through fear. Through the fact that I trusted the right people to tell me the truth, and they didn't." Dumbledore was looking at him. His face was very still. "I'm not going to stand here and say that what was done to me was malicious," Harry said. "I don't believe it was. I think the person who made the decision was afraid and certain and very powerful and very alone with his certainty, and I think that combination is one of the most dangerous things in existence. More dangerous than malice, in some ways, because it's harder to argue with." He paused. "You can argue with cruelty. You can name it and oppose it. It's harder to argue against a man who loves you and is wrong." The chamber was very quiet. "What I want the Wizengamot to understand," Harry said, "is not the scope of my capabilities. Dr. Pell's assessment covers that adequately. What I want you to understand is the specific harm of this particular kind of violation." He looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. "For 15 years, I didn't know who I was. Not in the way teenagers generally don't know. I mean, I was functionally prevented from accessing the truth of my own nature. Every effort I made, every achievement, every time I pushed past a ceiling and found something, that was me working with 15% of what I actually have. And I was told it was enough. I was told it was fine. I was told the limitations were mine." He stopped. "They weren't mine. They were put there. And the person who put them there stood in front of me every year and told me what a remarkable young man I was." Something moved in the chamber. Not a sound, a quality. "I'm not here for revenge," Harry said. "I don't need the Wizengamot to be angry on my behalf. What I need, what I'm asking for, is for this room to establish clearly that this cannot be done. Not to anyone. Not with good intentions, not for strategic reasons, not because someone very powerful decided that a child's full self was inconvenient for their plans." He met Ogden's eyes. "Whatever consequences follow from that establishment are for this room to determine. I trust Madame Bone's case, and I trust the evidence, and I trust that the truth is clear enough to speak for itself." He paused. "It usually is, if you let it." He stepped back from the witness position and went back to his chair. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then Gorse stood and said he had questions, and the procedural machinery resumed. Gorse was good. Harry gave him credit. He was technically excellent and he asked the right questions for the purpose he was serving, which was to establish that the suppression, however misapplied, had served a genuine protective function. He asked about Harry's survival at 14 months, about the Dursleys' household, about the specific year-by-year application and whether there was evidence that the power, unsuppressed, would have endangered Harry himself in a non-magical environment. Harry answered everything directly. Mr. Potter, Gorse said, isn't it true that without the suppression in place, the level of ambient magical output you now display would have made placement with Muggle Guardians effectively impossible? Probably, Harry said. Yes. And isn't it possible that, the solution to that, Harry said, was not to put me with Muggle Guardians? A beat. I'm sorry. Gorse said. The solution to the problem of my ambient magical output being incompatible with Muggle placement was not to suppress my magic, Harry said. It was to place me somewhere where the ambient magical output was not a problem. There are wizarding families who would have taken me in. There are wizarding homes. The suppression was not the only option. It was the option that produced the most manageable version of me. He looked at Gorse. I think that's actually the core of it. Gorse paused. He was good enough to recognize when a line of questioning had been turned against itself. He moved on. The chamber deliberated for 40 minutes. Harry sat in the antechamber with Ron and Hermione and Ginny and Arthur and Vance, and nobody performed certainty. Hermione read. Ron ate biscuits from a paper bag with focused dedication. Arthur sat with his hands clasped and his eyes on the middle distance. Ginny sat next to Harry and didn't try to fill the silence with anything, which was the thing he needed and she always seemed to know. Bones came out at 11:50 with her folder under her arm and said, "Come in." They went back in. Ogden read the chamber's findings. The suppression charms were ruled illegal, under the full application of the relevant statute. The harm was formally established as significant and sustained. Dumbledore was found responsible for the primary application and the ongoing maintenance. 3 secondary findings addressed the Ministry's ambient detection systems, which had registered anomalous suppression markers on Harry's core twice over the previous 5 years and had not followed up, which was an institutional failure distinct from the individual violation but real nonetheless. The consequences were graduated. Dumbledore's formal sanction included suspension of his Order of Merlin, not removal of title but suspension, which was its own specific category of public statement. His headmaster's authority was placed under formal review pending assessment by an independent educational board. He was required to submit to a full investigation of the ward application methods used through Hogwarts' foundational systems, which would take months and would be thorough. He was not imprisoned. Harry had not expected imprisonment. The decision was defensible. Dumbledore was 70 years old, had dedicated his life to genuine service, and the harm, though real and sustained, had not been physically injurious in the way that most criminal magical interference required for custodial sentence. What the chamber had done instead was something more precise. It had named what happened, in clear institutional language, as wrong. Not misguided. Not overcautious. Wrong. That naming would last longer than a sentence. Harry understood this and found it adequate. Fudge, in the gallery, looked like a man whose careful positioning had been comprehensively outmaneuvered by the facts. Which was accurate. Outside, in the Ministry atrium, with the crowd and the attention and the reporters who had apparently been there all morning, Harry stood for a moment and felt the specific texture of what had just happened settle into something he could carry. Ron was beside him, shoulder to shoulder, the same way he'd stood in the hospital wing Tuesday morning. Hermione on the other side, her parchment for once in her bag rather than her hands. Ginny slightly forward of them all, her eyes on the crowd with a calm, watchful look. Arthur behind him like a wall that had chosen to be a wall. "Statement," one of the reporters called. Harry looked at them. At the array of quick notes, quills and eager faces and the enormous, expectant attention of a community that had spent 2 days reading about this and was now looking at the actual person at the center of it. He thought about what Bones had said. Answer the questions you're actually being asked. He thought about Tuesday morning and the crack of the first charm and the world coming into focus like he'd taken off glasses he should never have been wearing. He thought about his mother's voice in the garden, returned to him after 14 years in the dark. "Not today," he said, to the reporters, simply and without performance. "Today I'm going home." He didn't mean the Dursleys' house. He didn't mean the Burrow, though the Burrow was warm and full of people he loved. He meant Hogwarts, and the castle knew it, because when Arthur brought them back to the edge of the grounds that afternoon, the foundational wards pulsed once, deep and warm and completely deliberate, the moment Harry's feet touched the path. He stood at the edge of the grounds and felt it, and looked up at the castle in the afternoon light, and pressed his awareness outward, and felt the building spread around him like an enormous, patient thing that had been waiting with absolute certainty. He walked up the path. 20 charms remaining. Then, by nightfall, 15. By the following Tuesday, 1 week after Pomfrey's diagnostic, 1 week after the world shifted on its axis in a sealed hospital wing in the rain, the last charm cracked at 3:15 in the morning while Harry was asleep in his dormitory, and what woke him was not the release itself but the silence it left behind. The absence of pressure. The absence of ceiling. He lay in the dark with his eyes open and felt himself, fully, completely, without limitation, for the first time in his life. He breathed in. He breathed out. The castle breathed with him. Outside, the grounds were dark and still and the stars were very clear, and somewhere in the wider world there were threats and politics and a war still forming and 100 complications that tomorrow would begin to address. But right now, in this moment, in the dark and the quiet, there was only this, a boy who had been handed back everything that was his, and the long, clear road of what came next. He closed his eyes. He thought, now we begin. And he slept.